Good morning.
Morning.
It's 9 o'clock and time for the July 2nd meeting of the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County. We're going to begin with a moment of silent reflection for the first responders, which will be followed by an invocation by Reverend Joe Moxley, and I'll be delivering the pledge. Please rise.
O gracious and merciful Father, we thank you for today and for this community. We praise that you have made Vero Beach and Indian River County a beautiful place to be. We thank you, Lord, for the people willing to serve and to share their insights and their plans for the future. Lord, we ask today for your presence to be felt by all that are present. We ask that our hearts and minds be open to your will and the process of governing empowered by you. O Lord, we ask that the decisions that are made today share your compassion and love for all. We thank you, Lord, for this time together, and we ask for your presence and your peace today as we go about taking care of your people and your creation. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will now ask if there are any additions or deletions to the agenda.
Move approval.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Fleischer, second by Commissioner O'Brien. All in favor? Aye. Passes 5-0. We now have proclamations and presentations. The first is a presentation of a proclamation honoring Gary Diltz on his retirement from Indian River County Board of County Commissioners, Department of Utility Services, Wastewater Treatment Division, with 27 years of service. Good morning. Would like to come up to the podium. Thank you very much for your 27 years of service. We all appreciate it, and we all certainly use the service that you help provide us. And with that, I'm very happy to read this proclamation honoring Gary A. Diltz on his retirement from the Indian River County Board of County Commissioners, Department of Utility Services, Wastewater Treatment Division. Whereas Gary A. Diltz retired from the Indian River County Department of Utility Services, Wastewater Treatment Division, effective June 30th, 2019. And whereas Gary began his career with Indian River County on September 30th, 1992, as a wastewater treatment plant operator trainee. He was promoted to a wastewater treatment plant operator C in September 1993, and then to a wastewater treatment plant operator B in November 2005, where he continued in that capacity until his retirement. And whereas Gary has served this county and the public with distinction and selflessness during his 27 years of service, he was dedicated and his work was greatly appreciated by the employer, citizens, and co-workers alike. And now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, Florida, that the Board applauds Gary A. Diltz's efforts on behalf of the county, and the Board wishes to express their appreciation for the dedicated service he has given Indian River County for the last 27 years. And be it further proclaimed that the Board of County Commissioners and staff extend heartfelt wishes for success in his future endeavors. Adopted this second day of July, 2019. Again, thank you very much for your service to the county. I think all in Indian River County appreciate it. And we're happy to have a few words from you at this point.
Well, I don't know. I guess there's not many people, so it doesn't matter. My voice will carry, but thank you for the commissioners for that kind effort. And Jason, I really appreciate you for the last 2 months that you've helped me out. As far as everybody else, Mr. Burke, I really appreciate your efforts too. And Terry Southard for hiring me when I got out of the military, which started this long career. I appreciate Rich Meckes, who I think is the best boss that most people could ever have. And for the rest of you guys that are here watching this, keep going with the way you're going. And David G, you're my brother, always will be. And, you know, look forward to you retiring so we can go fishing. And more than anything, I think my wife would too, which, hey, she's my hero. She saved my life 3 times.
Whoa.
And more than anything, she's the reason I'm up here.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to the presentation of a proclamation designating the month of July 2019 as Parks and Recreations Month. And we must have somebody. Good morning, Kevin.
Morning, sir.
Before you speak, I'd like to say one thing about Parks and Recreation. When people talk about government and the necessary services, I think Parks and Recreation is sort of underthought of, not thought of enough. And some people might, well, I've heard some people wonder whether Parks and Recreation is an essential service or not. But I think that over the last years, particularly when we faced an obesity epidemic, when it's been described in a lot of studies about how important the outdoors are to mental health and basically how crucial it is to a good community, I think we begin to have a greater appreciation of just how essential this service is. And it's one of the areas where I think that the county has done a very good job and is doing a better job over time. And as one of the users of particularly conservation areas, which have been developed in the last years, I'm very thankful for all the work that your group does. And I see just a lot of much better and greater things moving forward. I tend to think that 5 to 10 years from now, Indian River County is going to be known for its parks, recreation, conservation lands in a way that very few communities are. And I think it's going to make our community a lot better. So with that said, I'm clearly very happy to read this proclamation designating the month of July 2019 as Parks and Recreations Month. Whereas Parks and Recreations Month was established in 1985 and celebrates its 34th year state and nationwide. And whereas passive and active recreation in Indian River County significantly enhances the quality of life for its residents and visitors. And whereas active recreation builds teamwork, self-esteem, camaraderie, life skills, and contributes to a healthy mind, body, and spirit. And whereas passive recreation nourishes a love of the outdoors, provides an appreciation of the natural environment, and contributes to a healthy community and economy. And whereas county parks and conservation areas preserve the ecological beauty of our community, improve water quality, protect groundwater, prevent flooding, improve air quality, are aesthetically pleasing, and provide open green space for people and valuable habitat for wildlife. And whereas Indian River County is fortunate to have many beautiful parks, playgrounds, ball fields, golf courses, swimming facilities, nature trails, beaches, and open spaces, which make our community a more attractive and desirable place to live and play, as well as contributing to our ongoing economic vitality through increased property values, increased tourism, attraction of visitors, and recreational events. And whereas Indian River County Recreation Department provides a variety of recreation programs, including water safety, swimming lessons, baseball, softball, football, cheerleading, summer camps, and special events. And whereas parks and recreation agencies as a whole touch the lives of individuals, families, groups, and the community, creating a positive impact through connecting people, protecting the environment, reducing crime, and providing healthy recreational activities. Now therefore, be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, Florida, that the board designates July as Parks and Recreation Months and encourages all citizens to celebrate by participating in the diverse activities offered through the many facilities and places provided the residents and visitors by way of the Indian River County Recreation Department, Indian River County Shooting Range, Sandridge Golf Course, Gifford Aquatic Center, North County Aquatic Center, and any of the Indian River County parks and conservation areas open to the public. Adopted the second day of July 2019 and signed by all 5 members of the Board of County Commissioners. Thank you. And Kevin, any words for us today?
Well, first of all, it's not just Kevin, it's a whole team. It's a wonderful team and that I'm honored to work with and for. So thank you, Mr. Chair and Commission. Just one thing I'd like to get out for the record. For us in the Park and Recreation field, every day is Park and Recreation Day, not just the month of July. So we live it and we breathe it, and thank you for it.
Thank you.
Very good.
While they're lining up,
Thank you very much.
welcome Jonathan Billings as our new Ocean Rescue Supervisor. Emily's from our Aquatic Center. Brad is from our Parks Maintenance.
Michael?
Thank you very much.
That's okay. Don't worry, you're good. I can wedge myself in. You're good.
Everybody ready? On 3. 1, 2, 3. Do one more. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
All right. Great job, everybody.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just want to comment, Kevin made a comment about it's about the team, and he was quick to bring his team forward. When David Fleetwood retired, Mike Zito said, we have somebody good, we have somebody that's going to make a difference. And I said, well, there's big shoes to fill. David did an incredible job with that team. I met Kevin, and Kevin said, well, I'll let you know how I'll do. I have to see my team first. And then he came back and said, I got a great team. So he means everything he says. That Marine knows what he's doing. And I think we have great things to come in the future, too. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you, team.
Very good. We now move to the presentation of a cost share award of $1.5 million for the Moorhen Marsh Low Energy Aquatic Plan System. This will be presented by Abby Johnson with Doug Bornick of the St. Johns River Water Management District. And we welcome you both today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us today. As she's mentioned, I'd like to acknowledge my governing board member for this area, Mr. Doug Bornick.
I know everybody here.
Before I begin and blush about your project, I have to give a mega shout out to your staff, because while I'm here to present $1.5 million, let's
The other way.
put it right side up, if that helps.
Go cash it.
This could not be done without your staff. It's a district-wide competition. We have 119 municipalities. So please don't take it lightly that your project was approved. It's always stiff competition. So a mega shout out to your staff. And I know this is not your first cost share project that's been approved by us. So thank you very much, and a big shout out to your staff. Now on to the project. Thank you very much for taking the time to create yet another project that will improve water quality for water that will eventually go to the Indian River Lagoon. We're all invested. So it's not a light feat. This is $1.5 million that goes towards your total project cost. So we fund up to, I won't put you on the spot, 30% for some projects and 50% for water conservation. So 1.5 million is the max I think that we've awarded for the bigger projects this year. Thank you again very much. Do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Sure do. Yeah, I'm glad to have this for my home county. This part of the lagoon is the hardest part because we're between the inlets. And so the cost share money is the smartest money that St. John's does, in my humble opinion, because we bring in everybody. We bring in cities and counties that didn't participate or feel they're not a part of it. Now, through this program, we're bringing in projects right in our backyard, particularly my backyard, because my goal is to have our lagoon like it used to be 50, 60 years ago, where we all water skied like I used to do on this lagoon, and we're happy to do it. And I think projects like this will all be able to be back in that lagoon, enjoying the crystal clear water that can be there with a few more projects like this. Thank you all.
And thank you very much. We definitely appreciate not just the check, which is great to get, but the working relationship that we have with the St. John's River Water Management District. Your staff has been great to us in different issues, particularly the biosolids issue of late. And Doug, if you want to get more aggressive on that on the board, that'd be a great thing, because we just saw the first pass at the rulemaking by FDEP, and that's not going to do what's necessary to protect the St. John's River. So we look forward to working with you in the next couple of years to address that and many other issues. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, two things. One, we have Keith here in the audience, and Keith is kind of the main creator of this project, so I just want to recognize the work our Stormwater Division is doing on this project, and looking forward to this project coming forward. And secondly, I would just like to, I think on behalf of the entire board, thank St. John's for intervening on the Sunbreak Farms project. We greatly appreciate your support on that, and I think the more agencies and everybody we get behind that will be good. So I just want to, Doug, thank you and the governing board for making that decision to jump in and support us. So thank you.
I'd like to make a comment on that. That's a tough issue, and I think the state, the county, the state, and our federal government's got a tough issue. We can put people on the moon and have smartphones, but we still haven't figured out what to do when we flush our commodes. It's unbelievable tough science. We're finding the gray water that we thought would be okay to put in our urban areas and golf courses is showing up due to the new monitors. The dry biosolids is a tough issue, where to put that. The cities to our south that are growing want to put it in Central Florida. Central Florida now doesn't want it. It's going to North Central Florida. It's a tough issue. We need science to step up and figure that and crack that nut. It's a tough one for us all, for the lagoon, for this county, for the health of this big sandbar we live on. Florida is just a big sandbar, more connected than we ever dreamed. And there's really no magic in the coquina rock underneath us and the rocks underneath us. That water goes quickly into the waterways that we all love and have grown up around. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one for you guys and girls. It's a tough issue for our board. Where do you put it? How do you deal with it with the science and the technology we currently have? So it's a tough one for us all. But thank you.
Thank you.
Handing out big checks.
Yeah.
We like getting them.
Yeah, hey, Keith, come on up here, Keith.
Come on. Photo op.
You can hold it, you can't keep it, Keith.
Yeah.
You can spend it, though.
May you say pay raise?
On three. 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Thanks.
Well done.
You can't leave with it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice try, Abby.
We now move to the approval of the minutes.
Mr. Chairman, move approval of April 23rd, May 7, and May 14 minutes.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner O'Brien, second by Commissioner Adams. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. We now move to information items. I'd like to mention 3 retirements. We have a proclamation for Ronald Baxter on his retirement from the Public Works Road and Bridge Division with 32 years of service. So we thank Mr. Baxter for his hard work for the county. A proclamation honoring Richard Strickland for 25 years of service on the Department of Emergency Services Fire Rescue. Thank you very much, Mr. Strickland. And we have a proclamation honoring Eric Williams for his retirement from the Department of Emergency Services Fire Rescue with 30 years of service. Thank you very much for that. You are the type of people which make Indian River County a livable, great community. Anyone else care to mention or pull anything from the information items?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If not, we'll move to the consent agenda. Would anybody on the board care to pull anything from the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull item 8H, please.
8H. Anybody, any other items to be pulled? Would anybody from the public wish to pull anything from the consent agenda for
Yes,
discussion?
please. 8I, Laura Moss, Vero Beach City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. 8I.
Mr.
And-
Chair, if I may, I'd like to have 8J pulled.
8J, well, we've got a
Got to
string,
pull
H,
that.
I, and J. Well,
Yes.
well, anybody for K? No.
Looking at G, but.
With that, I'll be happy to get a motion to
Mr.
approve the
Chairman, I'll
consent
move
agenda as
approval
amended.
as amended.
We've got the motion from Commissioner Fleischer, second by Commissioner Zork. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Commissioner O'Brien, 8H.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an award of a bid for annual asphalt paving and resurfacing, and staff is recommending that the award go to,
All paving.
yeah, all paving, but also to list community asphalt as a backup. And I know we had issues with community asphalt. I'd just like to see if Rich Spirica, our Public Works Director, could just kind of ease my mind that we're confident that these issues have been put behind them and that we won't get stuck halfway through a project again and be left holding the bag. So, good morning, Rich.
Good morning, Rich Spirica, Public Works Director. As far as we know, and we've talked to the community, they have caught up on all their invoicing and that they're solid again. It was a issue in between Miami Home Office and the local community asphalt that has been resolved. So we're confident that if we need to use them as backup, we should be just fine.
So it's kind of more like a inter-office conflict and not something germane to the financial stability of the company?
No, sir, it is mostly an inter-office conflict.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Rich. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll move approval of item 8H.
Second.
We've got a motion from Commissioner O'Brien to approve, second by Commissioner Adams. Any other discussion? Anybody from the public wish to comment further on this? All, we'll now vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Next, we'll go to 8I. Ms. Moss, council member from the city of Vero Beach. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning to all. You'll be happy to know I'm not here to speak for the city specifically or to ask for a lifeguard station. I've been reviewing the larger picture for tourist tax, especially memorandum and minutes, because I think it got off track about 20 years ago, so no one here need take umbrage about any of this. It had nothing to do with anyone who's currently seated. But it did get off track. And that being said, I think it's time to begin to get it back on track. And when I say off track, and thank you to Mr. Reingold for supplying minutes of meetings, I'm referring specifically to 2 items at this time, and that has to do with 70% entitlement by the Chambers of Commerce, and also this idea that we're funding salaries for the Chamber of Commerce. And if you look at your own minutes, this is not you personally, but from 20 years ago, there was no set pattern or no set decision with regard to this. And I'm looking at the minutes, but these are from 2002, and this is from the Tourist Tax Subcommittee. And they're talking about this 70%, and it's Mr. Bates. And he says it's something that could always be adjusted. and I'm reading that, that's an exact phrase, and he emphasized this was something the TDC could always go back and revisit. Well, it's 20 years later, and we have not gone back, or they have not gone back to revisit it. And when, in fact, it passed, and this now I'm talking about the County Commission and your minutes, it's Chairman Mock and Commissioner Adams were not comfortable with allocating 70% to the chambers, and that's an exact quote, page 20, and that's from March 4th, 2003. So two of the five were against it at that time. Commissioner Gins talked about the tourist tax, and she said, well, you know, the commission, and this is an exact quote, they print brochures, do all the advertising, and arrange promotional events. The problem comes in, you know, when you start paying for salaries, and I'm going to read, these are your minutes again. So none of this is my opinion. This was discussed 20 years ago, and the people in power at that time were uncomfortable with it at that time. So Commissioner Tippin, and I'm reading the minutes now, this is back in that period, 2002, actually October 9th, and it's your TDC Tourist Tax Subcommittee. Commissioner Tippin related the issue of salaries had been debated every year, but the handout that management and budget gave to the agencies requesting funds was explicit about what the funds could legally be used for and included a policy statement discouraging requesting money for salaries. Mr. Baird acknowledged the county attorney's office had designed the packet to follow the law, but the law was not really clear whether salaries could be paid or not. He contended some county commission members felt TDC funding should include salaries, but the majority of the county commission at that time did not believe that salaries should be included. So I'll point out to you that the current budget, and that this is before you now, the recommendation, and by the way, there's no way you would know reading this backup material, which I assume is what you have, that this was not presented publicly, the chambers, I mean. Neither of the chambers made a presentation. The other four groups, Cultural Council, Treasure Coast Sports Commission, Vera Heritage, all made presentations to the Tourist Development Council, but the two agencies did not. And that struck me as strange that it's on the agenda today. I've attended the Tourist Development Council meetings for the last year, probably more than a year. But last year, the chambers did make presentations. This year, they haven't made presentations, so I was surprised to see it on the agenda, for you to vote on. And there's no way you would know that they hadn't even made a presentation. But to go back to this idea of salaries, and they're asking for quite significant increases. The Indian River Chamber of Commerce is asking for a $50,000 increase, which represents almost 11%. And Sebastian River Area Chamber of Commerce is asking for an increase of $66,273, which is a 67% increase. A 67% increase. And if you look at the details of what they're spending their money on, only about 25% of it goes to direct promotion. The rest of it is for salaries. And with the Chamber of Commerce, it's approximately half goes to salaries and expenses related to salaries, and about half goes to advertising. I understand that the Tourist Development Council, they don't have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers, but you do and I do, and we need to take that very seriously, and I think that has not been happening. I think that this Tourist Development Council has not had proper oversight, not from the County Commission, nor from anyone else for that matter. And I think we have, serious legal issues here that need to be decided. They haven't been. And as you may know, we had a new city attorney come in just yesterday, July 1st. I've already spoken with him about this. He's aware of this. So he will be speaking with you, Mr. Dillon, about this. And perhaps oversight even at a higher level, Tallahassee, for example, is required with regard to this, because I think we need to get this back on track, that we're not paying for salaries. One of the arguments that Jason and Mr. Brown made at that meeting was that you work through the chambers because it's the private sector. So, we want to use the private sector. Well, it's not the private sector if the majority of the money is going towards salaries. That's not the private sector. Then you are hiring someone, which was something that Mr. Brown said you were looking to avoid. You didn't want to hire somebody. But if you're paying salaries, that's not the private sector. And remember, how should chambers of commerce be funded? I didn't know, all right? I looked it up. Chambers of commerce are funded through events, and they're funded through membership. That's the way they should be funded. It should not be funded by the government. They should not be funded by the taxpayer. And remember, yes, tourist tax comes from tourists. However, any tax that the government charges belongs to the people. It belongs to the people. So if you're using the people's money to pay salaries, then we need to really take a close look at that, close look at what we're getting, and is there another way, another more efficient, more responsible way to handle this. So I would ask you specifically today, with what you have in front of you. Interestingly, by the way, the Cultural Council, which was taking the big hit on this because the shortfall was a little over $25,000. It was an odd number, but slightly over $25,000. And it was decided without hearing presentations from either of the chambers to deduct that $25,000 from the budget for Cultural Council. Again, taken by a vote by people who have no fiduciary responsibility. With all due respect, they have no fiduciary responsibility to taxpayers. So what I'm asking you today is to consider leaving the requested amount, which was not an increase, by the way, for Cultural Council. They were flat. They got $75,000 last year. They were just asking for the same $75,000. They work for the entire county. Let's not put every dollar into sports, okay? We're heavy enough on the sports, but remember, a lot of people come here for culture. We know that very well in Vero Beach. That Art Under the Oaks, that attracts 80,000 people, and Cultural Council helps promote that. So no one can argue that they don't have a major impact. We're not just about sports here, and let's please not limit ourselves, but to look at this budget, you would think so. So I'm here today to ask that you consider funding Cultural Council at the same level as last year, and with regard to the other two, keeping them also at the same level as last year, and whatever is left, now remember, they're asking, their increase totals over $100,000. That's the increase for the Indian River County Chamber and the increase for the Sebastian Chamber. Just the increase alone is over $100,000, which is more than the entire budget that Cultural Council was requesting, which was $75,000. So I ask you to keep Cultural Council at 75, keep everybody where they were. Keep Cultural Council at 75, keep Sebastian at what they had last year, and keep Indian River County Chamber at what they had last year. And that would, you'll still have money left over. That'll give us time for our attorney to work with Mr. Reingold to address this issue of paying salaries, and the other issue, this 70% issue. These are legal issues that we can address. But I seriously urge you to consider your fiduciary responsibility and to take those actions today. Any questions?
Mr. Chairman? I'd just like a point of clarification, and at the forefront, I personally, I'm not affronted, and there's no reason to be affronted, but as a point of clarification, when you mentioned that the TDC had presentations, but they did not include both chambers, both of our chambers, both in Sebastian and Indian River and Vero Beach. And again, Susan Adams is the current chair, but I served this chair for 5 years. So we can go back a little bit in history, and not so much as far back in history pre-millennial that you have, but in the past, what we have done was had the opportunity to have all requesters, presenters done in one day. And because the Chamber of Commerce presentations are so wide, varied, and robust, and have had the occasion to bring us to a new heightened level for tourism, that their presentations are done on a separate day. It's post the presentations. They are held accountable, and the agreement on the, there is fiduciary responsibility, and that percentage that was allocated towards the Chamber of Commerce was specifically done to ensure that we bring tourism to a heightened level, which I think we've done. I think that tourism here in Indian River County has grown exponentially without the benefit of a lifeguard station. So with that in mind, what we have accomplished, again, if you want to go back to the time in which you said there was some discussion, there was also great rivalry, there was great dissonance, acrimony was filled in the room. There were actually people throwing things, and they were not comfortable meetings. I think Commissioner O'Brien was also a chair in the past as well, and I will say that the meetings post the time before the millennium was quite different and cantankerous, and not a whole lot got accomplished. So I want to compliment the current TDC for what they've done, the cooperative efforts, and as a matter of fact, you said that you've attended this past year. You've attended a few years. You've been working on this lifeguard station quite some time. There is quite a lengthy history on it. And with that, working with our chamber and attempting to get that done, and which was recommended by the TDC, if you can work a different avenue, they most certainly were willing to work with you. As far as the people who appear before the TDC, the applicants, they have worked extremely hard, and many times after we've taken a break, they've talked amongst themselves and adjusted their budget to ensure that everything gets accomplished. They don't work as an I, they work as a team, and they complement each other. And I want to give compliments to all the applicants that have appeared before the current TDC, and I want to give accolades to Commissioner Adams for chairing a fine meeting, which I did have the opportunity to witness and review. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But the bottom line on this is that the chambers did not make presentations to the Tourist
No.
Development Council this year. I'm not sure why. And I guess you're voting on it today. So that's the reason. And if you want to look at absolute dollars, pardon me?
That's the next meeting of the TDC. They'll.
But are you voting on it today? You will have voted on it. Are you voting on this today? Okay, well, then they're presenting after you've voted. Usually it's the other way around. Generally, you hear the presentation before you vote on the presentation.
No, we're not voting on the presentation. We're voting.
No, so that you understand where the dollars are going.
I'll just ask.
I was just
remember
trying to
if you have any
clarify
final
and not mislead the public.
Well, last year, that's how it was done. Last year, all the presentations were made, then you voted
No,
on
that
it.
was not the way it was done.
Commissioner.
Thank you.
Okay. But if let's talk about absolute dollars for a moment. Absolute dollars in terms of tourist tax, let's go, if you look at what we collected 5 years ago and what we collected this year, in absolute dollars, the difference was $148,887. So in absolute dollars, what you gave the chamber 5 years ago and what they're asking for now is $383,144. So that's many-fold ahead of any increase in the tourist tax. Many-fold. And as I said, because they have not made a presentation, I can rely only upon what they have submitted in writing, and there is a place on the form where you have to justify anything more than a 5% increase, and because both of them requested more than a 5% increase, they have stated in writing their reasons, and Salaries, professional assistants, salary adjustment for tourism director, that's for IRC, content creation. And actually for Sebastian, almost the entire thing. Salaries, there are 5 items listed, and 4 out of 5, I'll just read them quickly. Salaries, employee benefits, payroll taxes, travel, transportation, membership dues, staff, volunteer development. You know, that's, we answer to the people. Which people is this helping? Is this helping everybody, or is this helping, are you just giving somebody a raise? Somebody you say, is not on staff, but you're paying them directly. And I really think that we need to understand where this money is going, and we don't. It's impossible. All you have is a form. That's accountability. And you don't have accountability, you beget the arrogance to constantly be asking for more and more and more money, way beyond the rate of increase of tourist tax. These salaries and these increases for these expenses that are not directly related to increasing tourism. So that's my request today. Leave everything as is. Cultural Council, leave it 75. Sebastian and Indian River, leave them the money they have. They had a big increase last year. When you have time, take a look at the increase per year. Or I'll come back at a later date and present it. I didn't know you were doing this. I was surprised, frankly, because there had been no public presentation. And by the way, there's another question I have. You want to allow public comment at that Tourist Development Council meeting. You never ask for it. There are no presentations, no public comment. It's entirely in the dark, so to speak. So thank you for your time, and I ask you to please consider that.
Thank you. So any comments on the item? Commissioner Adams.
Thank you. I would just like to say that the process that we went through this year is the same process we have gone through for multiple years. As the chair for the past 2 years, I can attest to that. As a member for the past 10 years, I can attest to that. There was lots of discussion. The Chamber's policy of 70% is a well-established policy going back to 2003. And with that, I think our discussions and the conversations that TDC board members had were robust. We ended up with this recommendation that's before you today. And with that, I would move approval.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Adams, second by Commissioner Flesher. My only comment is I'll see if the board wants to have Dylan just review some of the background paperwork, if this hasn't been looked at in 20 years, and an elected official in Indian River County it says there are things that might be illegal. For me, I'd feel better if
I'm happy for Dylan to look at it. I can tell you that we did talk about the 70% at this current TDC meeting. We've talked about it in the past, and in fact, at our next TDC meeting, we'll be discussing the rating sheets and that process. We try to look at that on a regular basis, just to see if there's any improvements that can be made, but I'm happy for Dylan to look at that. It does not ever hurt to have a second set of eyes.
That's my thought too. Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I welcome legal review by the Attorney's Office. I will say that at the last meeting, I think Dylan did a presentation on the legal expenditure of the tourist tax dollars. That's something we do at least annually for the TDC. Also, our auditors review all of our expenses such as this to make sure that there is legal compliance. So I don't think salaries are forbidden from that, but welcome Dylan's analysis on that. And I wanted to say something was stated about us funding the Chamber of Commerce. I want to make sure everyone knows there's a firewall between the tourist development portion of the Chamber and the traditional pure Chamber. So it's not uncommon for a Chamber of Commerce to serve as a tourism development agency, and I still think that is a better way of doing it than having, say, an in-house visitors bureau that's county employees. But there is a separate firewall. We get separate accounting from them on the TDC and on the EDC for that matter, that are separate and apart from the Chamber. So there's no commingling of monies between the Chamber of Commerce function and the tourism development function. And then I just do want to note that the combined chamber recommendations are 66.7% of the total, so it's still a little under the 70%. And then just a general comment about tourism. our tourist tax has now doubled since the downturn. So that indicates that, you know, what we're doing isn't broken, let's say, because I think that's a good record of success. I can tell you the rest of our local economy has not doubled in that time period. So I think that's a good track record of success. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify too, Ms. Moss mentioned that Commissioners Mock and Adams were not comfortable with the allocation, but she forgot to mention that the final vote was a unanimous 5-0 vote, so they did end up supporting the 70%. Jason did point out 70% would have been $698,915, but combined the chambers only asked for $683,000, so they asked for less than their 70%. And finally, you know, I don't hear any complaints from anybody that we're not doing enough to bring tourists here. You know, we have the issue of parking and things like that, so I think the chambers are doing a good job getting people here, and our hotels are full, hotels are busy. We see our summer slow season now, you know, being active. Our shoulder seasons are getting wider, and I think a lot of that has to do with the promotion that the chambers have been doing and getting people here. And once they're here, they like what they've seen and they come back again. So I would urge the city to work on their parking problem and make it enjoyable for visitors to come here and find a place to park down on the beach. So with that, I fully support the motion.
Thank you. Commissioner Zork.
Two questions that maybe Commissioner Adams can answer. Last year, I believe there was a request of some additional marketing support for airline services at the airport that I think was managed and functioned under the chamber. Is that still part of their going forward, since I have not watched the tape from the meeting that day?
So that has been, the airline, or the airport was working on some different things with different consultants, which they did a presentation at the tourism luncheon on, and we are moving forward with a visitor study to help get the numbers for the airport as to where our visitors are coming from, how long they're staying, the destinations they're traveling from, how they're arriving here, those types of things that the airlines that are looking to locate here are really looking for. So that is still moving along.
Okay, good. And lastly, under the Treasure Coast Sports Commission, they're the only one that actually tracks through their website booking, I think, the total number of room nights per year, because it's part of the team's registration. Do you recall what their room nights were this year? I know it's a very robust number, probably in the 30,000 room night number, but I was just curious to see if we knew what the recent number was.
That was part of their presentation. I don't have that in front of me. It was in line with what it is year after year, which is a large number. And that did not include bookings that happened not through their website,
which is still a considerable number over and above the recorded. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public wish to speak on this item? Come on up, name and address to the record, please.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Bates. Just wanted to touch on a couple things. Tourism, I'm very passionate about, and we have an amazing group of people in this county that continuously make things happen. To touch on a couple points, Councilman Moss had stated that we need to be, I have stated many times, we need to be physically responsible for the monies that we are distributing. So the 4% bed tax.
If you'll address the board and not people in the audience.
The 4% bed tax is collected from our tourists that are staying here. So it's our responsibility to then use those funds to send out the message of what we are in this county. We compete against every other county in the state of Florida. What would make a tourist come to our destination over another? Well, that's the job of our tourist agencies, our chambers. When we say chambers, it's not the Chamber of Commerce, it is the bed tax money that is being housed in the chambers, and sometimes people confuse those two together. So Allison's job is to advocate our county as a whole in bringing tourists here, and as well as Nicole for Sebastian North County, to have a complete collaborative effort. So to keep the budget the same as is, that would not be physically responsible in funding, because where are those dollars being spent? There's a lot of great things that are in our communities, festivals, activities. Those are draws for some tourists. But our main objective is to bring outside people into our area, whether it's from a different county or whether it's from a different state. And you can request any documentation to see where those dollars are being spent. And just to recap a little bit, this is just 2 quarters. So this is part of a marketing plan. This is something that's easily produced to be able to know where you're spending your money, what you're spending your money on, and then be able to look at your return later. Is this a publication that we want to use again? When it comes to the Cultural Council, there's no media plan. There's no media budget. There's no marketing budget. So how can we continue to give $60,000, $70,000, $5,000 when we can never see what those dollars are being spent on? The information that we do see of the information of where they're being spent on is local. So communication across media is print, all local print. Broadcasting is a local. Social media. So to continue to do what we've always done is being complacent. To look at the numbers, to know where our dollars are being spent, I would rather take $50,000 and put it somewhere that we know that we're gonna get $1 million return investment on. There are so many advertising initiatives that we would never have the dollars to pay for those. So there's a lot of collaborative effort when it goes to, when it comes to media, and that's what their job is. So to touch on that again, on the current, with the chamber's budgets, and to talk about the salaries as well. Indian River County, you know, it's one of the lowest in the state. So you have a budget it's small. To a lot of people, it looks large, and we manage very well with those funds. But it takes a lot of time. Press trips, media, putting ads together. There are so many components that go into advocating tourists in our county. It would blow your mind. And you guys only see and hear a snippet of some of those amazing things that we do. And what the county has done with our chambers in bringing so many great things and national things here. So I would definitely, it would behoove all of you to kind of look at all of those media plans. It is public record. You know, Ms. Moss had talked about you have not seen any documents, and I see a whole raging summary right here breaking down all the editorial, the marketing campaigns when it's snowing up in Boston and in different places. It has the sunny videos that are on the buses and trains and different locations like that. So there is a magnitude of dedicated work that goes into advocating tourists that come to our area. And I just wanted to make sure that I hit home how important that is, and how there's a lot of things that aren't trackable. That's what happens with tourism. You put things together in hopes that everything comes together the way it is. And if you look at the numbers of the rising bed tax, you can see that continuous rise on a lot of areas. That's all I have for right now.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public wish to speak on this issue? Name and address for the record, please.
Yes, Dory Stone, President of the Indian River County Chamber of Commerce, 1216 21st Street, Vero Beach, Florida. I'm just standing up here to once again thank you for your support of the continued relationship that we have with the County Commission in our tourism area. As Jason pointed out, there is indeed a firewall between the Chamber, the actual Chamber of Commerce duties, and tourism. And if there's any question about that, we provide an audit every year to the county with regard to our application, looking at our tourism dollars. We continue to appreciate your support, and through that support, we have over 8,300 jobs that are employed in Indian River County. We've had over 700,000 bed nights through our efforts in tourism here in Indian River County. And I continue to appreciate the fact that you as a commission have faith in us that we're doing what we're supposed to do. And regarding the chamber, it's my fiduciary responsibility to make sure that you're extremely comfortable with the relationship we have. This relationship goes back to a resolution that was done years ago between the county and the chamber, that the chamber would take on the tourism responsibilities. And we've done that, and I believe we've done that effectively. And what we're asking for this year continues to allow us to promote Indian River County and works responsibly for you. So I just want to reiterate my thank you for that and continue to ask for your support. We will be doing our presentations, as we've done every year, in September when we go through that entire spreadsheet that Jen just shared with you. So we look forward to answering any questions you may have about where your tourism dollars are going with regard to marketing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public?
Good morning. I'm Amber Batchelor. I'm President and CEO of the Sebastian River Area Chamber of Commerce. We're located at 700 Main Street in Sebastian, Florida. So thank you again, Mr. Chair, as well as the commission and staff. We are really enthusiastic about all the new opportunities that we continue to find and research in our efforts for the tourism program that we have established several years ago. There's a strong foundation that we continue to collaborate to not only bring people here, but to keep them here, because we understand the importance of the tourist tax dollars, and we want to continue to impact positively the heads on beds. And we are continuing to work across the county and collaboratively with Indian River County's Chamber's tourism program as well. And it's important that we also remember that we are accountable to you all as well as to the Council for Tourism. Every year at the beginning of the year for the first TDC meeting, we present to say where we stand, what we've done with those tax dollars to show that we are fiscally responsible. And that was a very intense presentation that was done by our tourism director, Nicole Holbrook. And we also presented through a grant application in March a very detailed plan for the following fiscal year. So we try to be a few steps ahead and remain a proactive organization. We really appreciate all the support that you all continue to provide, and we look forward to our presentation in September. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? Ms. Moss, we've got one more from the public, please. I'll let you
And
say
I'd like to
something.
just, Mr. Rangel.
Hello, I'm Barbara Hoffman, and I am the Executive Director of the Cultural Council of Indian River County. And I just wanted to comment on, first of all, to thank you for the years. I think we have been receiving TDC funds since 1985. And we were declared in 1995, we were named by the County Commission as the local arts agency for Indian River County. And we have been very proud of the work that we have done over all of those years in promoting arts and culture in our community. And we have done studies through the Americans for the Arts, which shows that 25% of the people who attend art events in our community are from outside of Indian River County. We have done what we feel is our best effort in promoting tourism and in recognizing the value of tourism in our community. And when people talk about Indian River County, many of them say and comment about the immense culture, deep culture and art that we have here. So we're very proud, of the cultural arts in our community. We feel that they are very significant in promoting our own residents, but also in promoting tourism. And I just want to thank you for your support in the past, and I hope we can count on your support in the future.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Councilmember Moss?
This is for Mr. Rangel when we're reviewing these matters. As I stated earlier, the traditional form of.
Ma'am, does it have to do with the item that we're voting on today?
Yeah, yes, it does.
But no, you addressed it to Mr. Reingold about when he's reviewing. That's not part of the motion today.
Okay. Well, we're operating without knowing. You'll make this decision without knowing what even what the membership is for the Chambers of Commerce. I requested that information and was denied that information. And there's been a discussion here that said there's a Chinese wall. I don't know about a Chinese wall, but there's definitely stonewalling going on. I simply asked for their membership numbers, Chamber of Commerce, who belongs, do they have members? What's their number of members?
Are we going to vote on it? Do you have anything that is in response?
Well, it does have to do with your vote, but thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion from Commissioner Adams, seconded by Commissioner Flesher. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. And we also have a consensus from the board that Mr. Reingold take a look at it. So I don't think there's any tremendous hurry, but we would appreciate you getting back to us. And with that, we move on to item 8J. Dr. Capola. This is Children's Services Advisory Committee recommended program funding. Good morning.
Morning and happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm Nick Capola, CEO of the Mental Health Association in Indian River County, 820 37th Place, Vero Beach. You know, I'm kind of amazed that I've never addressed this fine commission before because I love history. I love history so much that probably if I wasn't a physician or the CEO of the Mental Health Association, I'd probably be a history teacher. And every decision that you guys make in this room, whether it's easy or hard or heated or soft, it's history. One of the reasons that I love history is because I've had a bunch of great history teachers that made history come to life and be exciting for me. But the main reason I love history is because history is a great gauge for us to shape the future, because history will teach us the mistakes that we've made in the past, and it will help us make better decisions today. If we don't look back to history, we're forced to make the same mistakes we've made before. And with that, I'd like to get to my point, sorry. I have a few issues with the Children's Services Advisory Committee's decision with regard to their funding for year 2019-20. The first one is I read that Ordinance 9717 says, where as it is in the public interest to promote healthy children and a healthy community in River County. And with regard to the RFP, CSAC is tasked with caring for children's health issues for the next 25 years and beyond. With regard to their funding, I don't see anything here that they've approved for mental health. And mental health is the largest threat to us as a society and to our children all across our nation and in our community. Additionally, teenagers from the age 10 to 17 are the largest group of people committing suicide in this country. Every day in the United States, 1,349 teenagers attempt to commit suicide. 1,349 teens. The second problem I have with the CSAC grant is our program name is wrong. It's not the Walk-In and Counseling Center. This is for the School Violence and Suicide Prevention Program, of which we did this year. We went in and did a didactic program called Botman Learning, and we saw 940 freshmen at Vero Beach and Sebastian High School. Next year, we had planned on using Loyola University's Erica's Lighthouse program, and we intended to do that for 6th graders and 9th graders at 10 schools instead of 2, and reach 2,772 students. Lastly, my complaint about the process and procedure as we went before the the Children's Services Advisory Committee was, we were told ahead of time that we would be given 20 minutes, and after 10 minutes we had to stop in the middle of our presentation, in spite of the fact we had Dr. Sharon Packard, the district psychologist, there with us. on her time helping us out. So I just wanted to ask you all if you might address that and take a look at the funding process. I don't want to risk losing our funding next year with the Children's Services Advisory Committee, but I do have a couple of questions regarding that. Thanks.
Thank you for bringing this up. For myself, I hate trying to change allocations that are made by the committee, especially when I haven't been directly involved. But sometimes with these committees, I've seen that over time you get people who've got a certain direction that they want to go into, and they have their own interests, and they try to promote their interests in them. It just happens regularly. It turns out that, I don't know, is there anybody who you would say represents the mental health area that's presently on the committee?
Not that I know of, sir.
Okay, well, it turns out that my appointee recently left, so I'd actually be happy to chat with you to see if you have somebody who would be qualified to sit on that committee who understands mental health issues. I understand that mental health is an issue. I myself don't really think of it directly with this Children's Services Committee, but that doesn't mean it's not. So, I mean, that would be one path I'd be happy to explore with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that.
Thanks, and I'll be happy to buy lunch when we have the discussion.
I think it's my turn.
I know, but in this case, that it's county business, I'm going to buy.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I have a question for you and maybe for Jason. When CSAC was given its original numbers, it was somewhat based on, I think it was 6.3% estimated property value increase, and it came in at 7, which was much higher than the prior number, which means there will be likely a higher amount of actually collected that would then leave unallocated funds going into this pot. Is that a proper way to say that, Jason, based on the estimate, since the estimate came out? The estimate was lower than the actual, and would that create additional monies that potentially could be added without changing anybody else's allocation? You know, if the estimate was 6.3 and it came in at 6.3, that wouldn't happen, but now that it came in at 7, what does that do to the numbers, and does it create an opportunity for anything additional to be allocated?
So we, you know, the awkward part is we have to project this amount before we have the tax roll. Right. If the board wanted to take a look at that, we could recalculate that and see if what the additional funding would be available. That is one thing that could be done. What we used to do in the old days, we just used the prior year tax roll because we didn't want to get into projecting and over projecting or under projecting. But what we've changed the process over the years to have that that projection in there. So we're never going to get it exactly right.
Because the timing wise, you wouldn't. But
and quite frankly, understand that this might not address Dr. Coppola's issue at all, because we don't know who was next on the list. So again,
that's true.
Yeah, but so interjecting ourselves in something like this on the fly because there may be a few dollars up, I think is very dangerous. So if we have a process that we actually believe in, then I believe we ought to try to follow that process and, you know, get it on a path where the needs, if the Children's Services Advisory Committee believes in them, can be adequately funded.
Okay. So with that said, if staff did work it up and said, hey, there is X amount of dollars, it could go back to CSAC and go to whatever the next line item would be, whoever that would be. It may be the request you were working on, or it may be whoever's next in line. That would keep it fair.
Yeah, and if I may, Mr. Chairman, just Commissioner Zork, just for your information, the members of the Grant Review Committee spent 2 days listening to all the applications and making their presentations, and they spent a third day on their own time on a Saturday reviewing those and coming up with their allocations. Yeah, I agree with the chairman's statement that I think for us to interject at this point would be a lot of waste of everybody's time. I think we have the allocation here and that we should stick with what they've recommended. I will point out there's over $537,000 of requests that were not allocated. So, you know, I don't think we should be making that decision. I will point out that they base these on their 4 priority areas of the needs assessment. And in this year's budget, we are putting $50,000 towards a updated community needs assessment. And that might be something where Dr. Coppola wants to make sure he's engaged in that process. If mental health is going to be part of that community needs assessment, then that would be the time to work that into the process as well. But I think we should just stick with the allocation and the budget amount here and go with what has been recommended to us.
And I wasn't proposing changing any of these. It would be, go back to them and say, look, turns out we have additional money. What was next on your list? They don't have to rescore. I would think all the scoring's done. It would just go to the next candidate down. But that's my thought, but I don't count to 3.
Any other board member?
And I like Commissioner Zook's thought, Mr. Chairman, because quite frankly, the mental health arena was the only one that was vacant from allocation. You know, the last time that a review was done, as far as direction, I trust that mental health was not as a significant element as it is today. We were not having the events. We've been very blessed in Indian River County to have limited events, life experience changing events for young adults in schools, out of schools, specifically where if they're fortunate enough to have both parents, the youth that have both parents have perhaps maybe both parents working. And the schools, when any time there's an incident in school or out of school or a loss of a fellow classmate, the tension builds up so much that sometimes school has to be stopped. And they have to intervene, and there's not enough resources. And when you see a resource like this that wants to engage in order to, and we're reminded that we're here for health, safety, and welfare for our citizens, and that's the paramount concern, not disengaging from the recommendation from CSAC, but perhaps if there is additional funding that we could look at those 2 vacant spots that were omitted from allocation and perhaps allocate them even partially, since we do have a renewed number of the ad valorem taxes that will be afforded to this commission to make a decision to address the needs of this community. And I think that this is an undertow need that has not been discussed, that a lot of folks would like to see addressed, and we now have a new solution to the equation. And I think that there was another end of the mental health arena that was also not addressed, and I think it should have been. So I like the idea of suggestion or review, and perhaps maybe in addition, if we can afford that, the opportunity, as opposed to waiting after the assessment and maybe another year or 2 years, because if a tragic event does happen and we do not have that intervention quotient, then I know I would feel that we did not do our job to the fullest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just point out that I think that'd be a bad precedent, because we're just slightly over 2 weeks from our budget workshop, and now we're talking about reallocating funds that have already been determined. Jason's already worked up a tentative millage rate, and if we do this now, we're going to be doing this every year, where somebody comes to us and says, well, I don't like how it was allocation. Did it go up more than you thought? And then we're back having to redo this whole thing again. It's unfortunate that this wasn't funded, but that was the decision of both the Grant Review Committee and the Children's Services Advisory Council. And I think we have a budgeted amount, and we should stick to it. And again, urge Dr. Coppola to get engaged with the needs assessment. And Commissioner, you are right, things have probably changed. I think the last needs assessment was back in '05, '06, or '07, something like that. So certainly the world has changed and that's why we're doing the updated needs assessment, and the mental health component may be much more prominent now. But being all that said, I think we just need to stick with what we've done. We've got a lot of volunteer citizens that put a lot of time and effort into this, and I just feel that we should respect what they've done and go with the recommendation before us.
Thank you. Ma'am, wait. Dr. Capola, you finished?
May I just answer a little bit about Commissioner O'Brien's info and just reiterate some of the stuff that Commissioner Flesher said. 41 acts of school violence have been perpetrated in this country. 75% of those people that have done those acts have either had a prior suicide attempt or suffered from depression. What we do is to try and prevent a Marjorie Stoneman type event from happening here in our county. The state has mandated that the schools have programs such as the one that we're providing. Of course, the state funding doesn't meet the ever-increasing need. They've paid for school officers and for psychologists at the school and therapists, but we do crisis management, but we also do the didactic part. Last year, the sheriff could probably tell you, I believe there were 3 students that were stopped who were planning violent attacks in Indian River County. And I want to stress the importance that if our job as a community, not just you guys and not CSAC, but everyone, is to promote the health of our children, then this is an issue that we need to address one way or another. And I do appreciate Mr. Chair and Commissioner O'Brien's position on not wanting to change precedent. That makes logical sense to me, but I think CSAC dropped the ball for us at the risk of losing a grant next year, which I hope we don't do, but I do intend to become engaged and get on CSAC or have one of our people on there. But mental health is an epidemic in our country, and I just think we need to address it as best as we can, and I'm hoping that you guys can help us find a solution. But thank you very much for hearing what I had to say, and I appreciate all of you very much for what you do. I also want you to know, you are fine stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. So are we. Last year, the hospital taxing district funded this for us, and they funded us to $75,000, and we only used $45,000 of that. So we saved the taxpayers $30,000 by not using that. We only drew down $45,000 on that grant. So I want you to know that we at the Mental Health Association are also stewards of the taxpayers' dollar, as well as trying to help our community's mental health needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Ma'am, name and address to the record, please.
I'm Jeannie Shepard, the Clinical Director of the Mental Health Association, and I just want to comment that the CSAC Children's Needs Assessment may need to be redone, but the county 2017 Needs Assessment for Indian River revealed that the largest issues in our community were mental health and lack of access to care. So that needs assessment has already been conducted. I also just want to urge the commission to look at 20 years later the true meaning behind the city ordinance 7917 to create the Children's Service Advisory Committee, which is to focus on the child welfare in Indian River County and to use taxpayers' dollars to serve the greatest number of children. If we look at the allotment for the year 2017 to 2018, 4 entities received 52% of the funding that was allotted. I think that if we want to have a wide impact within Indian River County for the welfare of our children, our youth, we need to look at funds being dispersed to greater areas of need and look at the ratio of the cost of services versus the number of children that are served. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on the public?
Laura Moss, City of Vero Beach. I'd just like to thank Dr. Capola for the important work that he does in the community with regard to mental health, and also to urge the County Commission to support him in this and to honor his request. Thank you.
Name and address for the record, please.
Good morning, Commissioners, Mr. Chairman. I'm Bob Schlitt. I sit on the Children's Services Advisory Council, and as such, I also sit as the chairperson of the Grant Subcommittee. So I did want to just take a couple minutes to respond to some of Dr. Capola's notes that he indicated. We did spend, as Commissioner O'Brien mentioned, each organization is given, each program is given 20 minutes to present to the CSAC committee. That 20 minutes includes time for presentation as well as time for discussion and questions on behalf of the committee. We have, I believe it was 41 programs that requested funding this year. We have 2 days allotted to this. So basically, we went from 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. Thursday and Friday of, I don't remember the exact dates, but, and each program was given 20 minutes to make their presentation. This was the first year that Dr. Capola presented to us, and I don't know for sure, but it was the first year since I've been on the committee that MHA, the Mental Health Association, requested funding. So if there was not clarity on how that 20 minutes was going to be allocated, you know, I apologize that that wasn't clear, but it's been the same way that's been taking place since I've been on the committee, and I'm sure that was a question that he could have asked staff. So it was a case where they were given 20 minutes to present and to give us time to ask questions. Every program had that same 20 minutes, and we were just clicking along. We had to move. You know, we had people sitting outside waiting to make their presentations. So as far as that goes, that's how we do it. As far as the priority, there are 4 priorities, and unfortunately I don't have the complete verbiage of how those are laid out in the RFP, but there is, in that RFP, not only do the 4 priorities exist, there's a preamble to that priority list that indicates that mental health is something that we consider in all of the priority areas. So I'll just review very quickly the 4 priorities. Early childhood development for ages 0 to 5 is our #1 priority. Building parent capacity is #2. Out-of-school recreational activities and enrichment programs are #3. And #4 is middle and high school programs that address risky behavior. And again, the preamble to those explanations in the RFP does include verbiage, something along the lines of consideration of mental health is given in all of the priority areas. As it relates to priorities, part of the funding that you're being requested for today, it's been mentioned by Commissioner O'Brien, who took a lot of my thunder away this morning, is a $50,000 allocation. The original mandate for setting the CSAC up includes a requirement for the county or for CSAC to do a priority needs analysis every 3 years. And CSAC has, as indicated, committed, or we're asking for your funding to commit $50,000 towards a countywide needs analysis that is going to put emphasis on children's needs. That $50,000 is specifically funded by the county. There are other organizations that have put in the rest of the money to, this is going to be a countywide needs assessment, and Children's Services is specifically in that. So that is included. And finally, in regards to actual funding of mental health, there was one other program, and it was another new program, and that is through Tykes and Teens, infant mental health. They did request $84,810, and we did recommend funding that infant mental health, and that one fell under priority need #1. Finally, I did want a couple things that came up during our conversation, and I will say, if you ask me, how much conversation do we have on Mental Health Association's request, without any question, this was one of the top 5 conversations that we had. There was a lot of interest in funding the program that MHA came to us on, which primarily was a preventative program for teen suicide, or I say teen, youth suicide prevention, called Erica's Lighthouse. And the committee felt very strongly that this was a worthy prevention program that MHA was going to be presenting to, I believe it was 5th and 9th grade students at county schools. Some of the reason that the committee decided not to make that allocation to mental health, partially, I mean, in all honesty, the presentation from MHA was less than optimal, and it was a situation where we weren't real clear exactly on everything they were looking to do in their program, but the Erica's Lighthouse portion of it we felt very strongly was a good program, in that this is something that's going to touch every child in the school district, and in I believe there may have even been some charter schools and some private schools that were included as well in suicide prevention. In the meantime, since we did the allocation, I do know that there's been some conversations with another organization in town that has decided to take up the Erica's Lighthouse program and present it for the schools this coming year. And also that other funders have stepped up and provided some funding for that. So from the standpoint of mental health, although we are not recommending specifically this program, I do believe we did consider, and you go through these programs, there's a number of them that have a mental health a portion of their program involves something towards generally prevention, I mean, substance abuse, I mean, substance abuse falls under mental health, and there's funding for them on their redirect program, as well as some preventative programs there as well. So, like I mentioned, there was specifically the infant mental health program. I would recommend that the commission move forward with the funding as we recommended. I am not in favor of trying to reallocate all over again. And lastly, as much as I would like the funding mechanism of this whole process to be as objective as somebody's next in line, unfortunately there's a lot of subjectivity to this, and there really is no next in line, although I will say, without any question, there was a lot of discussion on this particular program. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your service on CSAC. You have a question for this?
Actually, for the speaker, if I don't mind. Thanks for your service and time you spent on CSAC and caring for the kids in the community. So, and this will be kind of a two-part question, part for you and part for Jason. So when the original amount of the $2,012,611, that was applying the estimated tax roll against the millage that the funding amount's supposed to be matched to, correct?
Correct.
So if we now have more money, one, I want to be a good custodian of the money for whether it's today or future CSAC. So if we apply the millage to the new number and we've only spent X dollars, there's going to be money left over. Does that stay into a fund so it would be added to CSAC for next year? Because we have more than that.
That's a Jason question.
Right.
Yeah, so we just make the allocation whatever it is, and that's the amount. There's no extra amount that would be left over in there. That's what we base the budget on. I will say, just doing some back of the envelope numbers, those 0.7% increase is about 14,000 and change, between 14 and 15,000 for what it's worth.
Okay,
in making the decision.
that paints a picture on it. And obviously I'm in favor of moving forward everything that you had proposed. It would happen to be if there was additional money. How does the mechanics work? Does it say, is there somebody that just missed it by a small fraction in number of points, or your scoring, that if more money was available, would it go to that next project in line, something that you guys have already dealt with or visited?
I think to a certain extent, Commissioner Zork, yes. I mean, I believe there are certainly some of the grant requests that came close to us giving additional funding to, but for lack of funds, they didn't get them. But again, it's not a next in line kind of thing, because it's not numerical.
Okay.
It's pass-fail.
Okay. All right, well, great. Thank you for explaining that, and thanks again for your service.
Thank you very much. Name and address for the record, please.
Sorry for this, but my name is Wilfred Hart, 61719 Place Southwest, Vero Beach, Florida. The only reason why I came up here today, and I'd like to just come and visit, but today I had an opportunity to talk with Mr. Coppola over there, Dr. Coppola, and I presented something to him because there's a great need in my community of Gifford. And he explained to me that there was not enough money out there where this committee, this board was kind enough to name Gifford Park after my father. I went to him and I went to Commissioner Fletcher about a green space, and I just call it a green space. And I spoke with Dr. Coppola about getting probably some of the top scientists and psychologists and psychiatrists in the world to come to Indian River County and figure out a way how we can help our mentally disturbed. And he told me it's a funding issue. Now, it only takes 3 commissioners to say yes on this, and I believe, Mr. Brown, that we can figure out and give a couple of extra dollars here. I know, Mr. O'Brien, you say we don't want to set precedent. But yes, we do on this occasion of life. I have family members, I have friends that have mental issues. I've seen a whole lot of things. I hang out in places sometimes so that I can learn and watch to see why people do have mental issues. And it could be alcoholism, could be drug use, it could be just about families in general. I've seen it all. And this is one time, I believe, that we need to look past precedent and say, let's figure out how we can fund this, Mr. Brown. Put some additional dollars in this. This board, I know, is very studious with the taxpayers' money. And Mr. Zork, you brought this question up because I believe in all your heart that you want to put a couple extra dollars in this thing. Ms. Adams sits and she observes and she's very articulate. I can't figure out where you headed on this. But I want you to go in the right direction. So I'm asking this board today to do the right thing for the mental health. It's not about Dr. Coppola at all. It's all about doing the right thing. So I'm going to ask y'all to do the right thing.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? Jefferson, if it's a response to somebody else, Doctor, it's not a debate here. So. But there were some misstatements. There are a lot of misstatements. If you feel a need to correct them, come on up. But again, you can challenge 90% of what everybody says here. That's just life in America.
I just want to say one thing, if I may. I just want to say that my shortcoming in presenting to them should not be a cause for them to drop the ball on mental health. Thank you. That's all I had to say.
But again, this isn't about mental health. It's about children's services and the process that's began a long time ago. And the presentation did say that they address mental services in a number of ways, just not the specific way that you want to. So
I'd like to know what infant mental health care is. I mean, is that?
Then go ahead to the next mental health advisory, the next Children's Services Advisory Committee and ask them to explain themselves. But this isn't the forum to get into and develop into every aspect of the Children's Services Advisory Committee.
The last one was 6 months ago. I don't know when the next one is. I imagine it's another 6 months, but that's fine. I just appreciate you very much. Thank you.
And no one else from the... Name and address for the record, please.
My name's Miranda Hawker. I'm the health officer for the county for the Florida Department of Health in Indian River. And I am not going to take much time. I know you've have a lengthy agenda. What I did want to say is the county has funded $50,000 towards the current countywide needs assessment. And in terms of Children's Services Advisory Committee, of which I am the chair, our priorities in the coming year, as Commissioner O'Brien had said, are going to be driven from that needs assessment, and that is taking in many priorities, including housing, senior services, children's services, public health. And certainly in public health, we know the value of mental health and its contribution to overall physical health. So I do anticipate with your appointment, Commissioner Solari, and we'll be excited to see that to CSAC, that as with every year, and we have a wonderful grant subcommittee that takes many, many hours to review all of this information, that we'll carefully look at that once again based on the new priorities.
Thank you very much. Any new speaker from the public? There being none, commissioners?
Chairman, go ahead and move staff recommendation.
We have a motion from Commissioner O'Brien. I'll be happy to second it. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
I did not hear two votes on either side. So Commissioner Adams, I didn't hear your vote on this one.
Oh,
Are you
I'm
for or
sorry.
against?
I'm for.
You're
It's
for?
a positive vote.
Silence is a positive vote.
It's
Oh,
silence is a
okay,
positive
I'm
vote,
just
sir.
not used to it here. Rarely are any of us silent. Commissioner Fletcher, I'm sorry, yours?
He's positive on
A
it.
positive on
Okay,
it.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure. So we have a 4-to-1 vote for Commissioner Zork dissenting. And with that, I think this is a good place.
Do you want to do Judge Cox real quick?
Oh, yeah.
And then she can,
Oh, I didn't
oh,
even
yeah,
see,
okay, all right.
What's the hang with us?
didn't see the judge.
Thank you.
Take 10 minutes?
You heard that.
I heard that.
It's time to reconvene the Board of County Commissioners meeting of Tuesday, July 2nd. We move on to constitutional officers and government agencies, 19th Judicial Circuit Court Judge Cynthia L. Cox, and she's here to discuss an award for 2019-20 Alcohol and Other Drug Abuse Treatment Fund. Good morning, Judge Cox.
Good morning. Thank you
You're
for
on.
having me, and I promise I'm not going to talk about mental health. I will try to be brief. We'll try to be brief. I think the memo summarizes my request, but I do want to kind of remind you that this fund, this trust fund, was created many years ago. It's based on user fees, and the funds were intended to be used for treatment, substance abuse and alcohol treatment. We tapped into the funds when we started our drug court in 2002. We got $2,000. It was kind of like seed money for those that couldn't afford their treatment. We made them pay it back. And then last year and the year before, we also came to you and requested these monies to assist us, primarily with mental health court testing. Primarily it was for drug testing, as well as the veteran treatment court and our drug courts. So I'm here on behalf of all of the problem-solving courts, even though I'm the administrative judge just for the mental health court. And I'm asking that you, as you know, that fund has been sitting and it's accumulated about $250,000 with interest. It sits there. Last year we used less than what it brought in, and we're asking for $50,000, up to $50,000. And I know Commissioner O'Brien's going to ask me some questions about that, so I'm prepared, and I want to tell you that, as you all must know, we are in a horrible opiate epidemic. And only the privileged in Indian River County can now participate in our drug court because it's self-funding. So if they cannot pay the $400 per month, they cannot pay for their testing and treatment. Last year we had more than 500 people that were eligible to participate in drug court, but a little less than 80 chose it, and we think it's primarily because of finances. The Florida Supreme Court has mandated that we become certified, our problem-solving courts that is, by 2020 and comply with the key components and the standard best practices. Standard best practice 2 requires equity and inclusion, and that means that we want to offer our program to everyone, not just the privileged. And these funds will allow us to continue what we're doing now with our problem-solving courts by assisting those that cannot afford testing or treatment, and also open it up to the 200% poverty level defendants that want to address their opiate or other substance abuse problems and participate in our court. So that is the other issue. We used to pay $8 per test for drug testing, and that was increased to $19. So our expenses are going up. We have our grant ends, as you know, in January of 2020, so we're losing those funds as well. So I'm here to request the $50,000 that would take us out at least 7 years, even if we didn't replenish. But I'm encouraging all the judges to make sure they assess that so we can replenish this fund and attack the opiate epidemic right now while it's taunting our communities. Anybody have any questions?
Any questions for the judge?
Chairman, I don't have any questions for Judge Cox. I will comment that, I guess it was a month or two ago, I attended another one of the graduation ceremonies, and as always, it's very impressive when you listen to some of the testimony of the graduates and how this has really changed their life and got them back on their feet. And then the other thing that I find impressive, well, two things. One is how everybody's working together. The district attorney's office, the public defenders, judge, and all the court advocates and all the agencies that work with them, they're all really pulling together to make this a success. And so I'm always impressed with that. And then for the people that slip up, Judge Cox yields a big stick, and there's no kind of, you screw up, the bailiff takes you out right then. There's no listening to excuses or anything. It's a tough love thing, I guess, but I think Judge Cox does a great job with this, and so I'll be glad to recommend approval of her request for the $50,000.
Got a motion by Commissioner O'Brien, second by Commissioner Flesher. Any other comments or questions from board members? Anybody in the public wish to speak on this item? In that case, we'll take the vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank
Cox.
you for your consideration, your vote, and your kind words.
We now move to public items. The first is a public hearing, consideration of a request by Garrett Goodrose to amend land development regulations regarding piers, docks, and boat slips. Good morning and welcome, Roland.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Roland DuBois, County Interim Community Development Director. I have a PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, there you go, Roland.
Bob,
that didn't take long.
Stand just retire.
So this is a request for an amendment to the county's Land Development Regulations, Chapter 932, Coastal Management related to unwalled boat shelters. Just a little background. Since 1991, county land development regulations have set a limit for unwalled boat shelters over waterward of a shoreline, to a footprint of 400 square feet or less. Prior to that time, the county didn't have any regulations that addressed the issue. When it was adopted and discussed in 1991, requirements were adopted to allow, with regulation, unwalled boat shelters over water to be consistent with state and other jurisdictional agency requirements at the time. And there was also some discussion, and it was also set to establish a size limit to prevent an abusive out-of-scale size of a boat shelter over water. Recently, and the premise for this presentation is Garrett Goodrose, who's an owner of a dock on Indian River Drive. He had received state DEP approval to modify his existing dock by adding a 976 square foot unwalled boat shelter over 2 combined boat slips and lifts. And that the county's 400 square foot limit is no longer consistent with the state allowance and limited his proposed shelter, he applied for LDR amendment and looking to have the county's regulations revised to be more consistent with state requirements. Here's an arrow just to give a perspective of Mr. Goudreau's dock as it currently exists. It's an existing dock, and part of his current project is to expand it and to include a boat lift shelter. Here's a rendition of his proposed dock, which extends the dock further waterward and proposes, it's actually two combined boat lifts and shelters, where the combined square footage of the two would be 976 square feet, which again is beyond what the county's ordinance currently allows. And looking at the state requirements, there's two sections in particular we looked at under Florida statutes 258.42. This relates to docks within aquatic preserves, which is essentially for Indian River Lagoon and St. Sebastian River. They allow roofs over boat lifts, provided the roof does not overhang more than 1 foot beyond the footprint of the lift and the boat stored at the lift. In the Florida Administrative Code relating to FDMP rules related to docks, this kind of goes with it. Those roof structures combined with the overall dock over water shall not exceed 2,000 square feet. So essentially Mr. Goudreau's dock met that requirement. His total dock over water, including the proposed shelters, does not exceed the 2,000 square feet. So it would be allowed by the state. This did go through the Planning and Zoning Commission under a first hearing back on May 9th. At that time, the Planning and Zoning Commission voted 4-1 to recommend that the County Commission adopt revisions to the current 400 square foot restriction to be more consistent with state requirements. But at the same time, they also directed staff to do more analysis and look at possible solutions, revisions to limit the overall size of boat lifts, something that would not be obtrusive or unreasonably large. Particularly, the concern was once you get close to the shoreline, along a seawall or in a canal, the allowance of a shelter the size of what Mr. Goudreau's is proposing was a little concern to the board, the commission, versus say one that's 200 feet out on the river off Indian River Drive from a scale perspective. So with that direction, staff did looking at possible solutions, coordinated with the applicant's agent, Dr. David Cox, reviewed it, and what we have proposed in the packet is what came out of that review process. And essentially, what we're proposing and what is proposed is essentially to retain the 400 square foot boat shelter allowance, but if you want to go above that, you can only go above that up to a total maximum of 1,000 square feet, but only if it's 50%, doesn't exceed 50% of the total area over water of the combined boat shelter and dock itself. And in doing so, from staff perspective, it does provide a mechanism to prevent out-of-scale shelters, say within canals along the shoreline, but it also would be appropriate and consistent with the state in areas, say along Indian River Drive, where it's out in the river. I do want to point out there are LDR requirements or county code requirements that are not proposed to change, that in and of themselves they limit boat shelters, and those limits would still be there. For example, there'd have to be a demonstration that the shelter will not be in an area that would adversely impact seagrasses, and that goes hand in hand with the state requirements when they're locating such proposals in terminal platforms. There's a current existing height limit on unwalled shelters that would not exceed 20 feet above the mean high water line, so that in and of itself has a limitation on the size of boats that could be put under a shelter. Particularly in canal areas along the shoreline, we also have requirements that a shelter could not, or a dock itself could not encroach into riparian side yard setbacks. And also, docks shall not extend more than 25% into the width of a waterway, which particularly comes into play on canals. So all these aspects of our code that currently exist also serve to limit the opportunity or feasibility of the size of a shelter above and beyond the allowance of the 400 square feet or the 1,000 square feet that is being discussed. When we look at the proposed amendment as it's evolved since the P&Z meeting, we think that the county's unwell boat shelter size limit, this will make it more consistent with the state and other jurisdiction agency requirements, but it would also deter out-of-scale size shelters. It will reasonably enhance but adequately regulate private riparian rights. And it will also result, from staff perspective, there'd still be minimum environmental impacts due to the change because of the other requirements that state and county have that I mentioned. Alternatives, the board in bringing this forward for you to consider is to adopt the amendment as being proposed, or to adopt it with modifications, or to deny the amendment that's proposed. Staff's recommending that the board adopt the proposed ordinance revision as presented. And Dr. Cox is here, I believe, if there's any questions of Dr. Cox or of staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Any questions of Roland? Commissioner O'Brien.
Thank you. Roland, can you go back to the slide of the sketch of the proposed dock, please?
Yep.
So the question I have is, particularly the mooring area 2, the lift is 14 feet long and 14 feet wide, and the vessel for that is going to be a 34-foot center console. And usually on a lift like that, and only 14 feet long, the boat is usually centered on the lift. And so my question is, why are they going 40 feet long, which would be 3 feet beyond the footprint of the boat, and should only be like 38 feet, which is 1 foot on either side. Same with the other one, that's a 17-foot, so really they should only be going 19 feet instead of 21 feet. So any idea why they're extending beyond the 1 foot overhang?
Dr. Cox may be able to answer that better than me, but I'm thinking they're probably just under the concept of combining the two lifts into one shelter versus two separate roofs. I think the width is 16 feet beyond the 14, so that...
No. Yeah, the width is fine.
But as far as the length...
lift is 14 feet.
Right.
And 1 foot on either side would be 16. So I get that, but a 34-foot boat is going to be centered on that lift. So if you're going from the motor to the bow, that full 34 feet, you know, it's not going to be half on the lift, you know, so
Right.
there shouldn't be any extension. So.
I think it was really, again, my thought is that they just, rather than having two separate shelter roofs that aren't connected, they just went for the overall one roof coverage, which will result in that extra roof coverage between the lifts. That's, I'll ask Dr. Cox if he wants to add to that, but that's my understanding as to why they went with that versus
well, but
the shorter length.
whether that's what they wanted to do or not, if it's not according to what the state says, and I'm not sure why they're doing it, or why the state even approved it.
I'm not sure, I don't have the answer why the state approved it, but and as the state requirement, as we reference, is only supposed to go a foot over the boat on the lift, so that's a good question. I don't have an answer.
Maybe Dr. Cox could answer that.
We'll get to Dr. Cox later, and we want the commissioners to ask their questions now. Commissioner Zork.
Yes. Roland, can you go to the one that had the summary of the state statute that now has the total maximum area, including the dock going out to the lift area, was 4,000, I think, in something, a total aggregate number? Not that one, maybe it's the next one.
There's a 2,000 square foot limit, if that's...
Okay, so in the proposed ordinance, so the state has a cap of a maximum of 2,000, including the dock and the covered lift area.
Right.
in our ordinance, I think it would be helpful. We've specified they can go from 400 up now to 1,000, but you know that that number gets deducted off of the state cap, and that's what you're left with to get
Yes,
off the shore area.
that's correct. We didn't specifically pull the 2,000 square foot limit into our code, but effectively that would be it, because when combined with the state. Now, the thing is, if you're in a canal, for example, the
Right.
state's requirement doesn't apply in canals. And that's where we get into the scale. If you want to go beyond what's currently allowed, which is the 400 square feet, if you can fit it, you can go potentially up to 1,000 square feet, but only if that coverage is not more than 50% of the total footprint of the dock. And when we looked at that, particularly, we did an exercise of looking at marginal docks in canals, marginal meaning essentially along a seawall, along a frontage, looking at typical width of lots and what's the largest could be allowed, but also meet riparian access and navigability and a 25%. And we concluded that that's a good way to have a scale, is to have 50% or of the size of the dock that could be allowed. And it did run into, typically it would limit it, depending on the size of the lot in the canal. You could have some shelters that could be over 400 square feet, like say in the 600 square foot range, but we felt that was a reasonable approach.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for staff? I just have one, Roland. Why is there any limitation on the size of the shelter?
It's really based on the direction we got from the Planning and Zoning Commission. There was a concern, and from a staff perspective too, there's a concern of the scale. And to have 1,000 square foot boat shelter within the canal, that was the concern, or along a riverfront, along the riverfront dock. Particularly the area that we looked at on that issue, which was raised at the other hearing, was South Barrier Island, from south of the city limits along the intercoastal where it fronts, not actually in the canals itself, but the potential for, there's deep water next to riverfront lots, and it's just an issue of scale.
Just scale? Because I always thought that one of the reasons, especially on the lagoon, for not having big coverage over the lagoon had to do something with the health of the lagoon.
Right, well, that's the other part where there's a fundamental upfront requirement. You can't be putting these over grass bed areas or areas with potential grass bed.
Okay, that's what so
that's covered.
Some of it does have something to do with the health of the lagoon.
Yes, certainly. That's an integral component. That would have to be the first thing to look at, make sure it's located so as not to be detrimental to aquatic vegetation such as seagrass.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for staff? There being none, we'll now open the public hearing. Anybody from the public care to speak on this item?
Come on up.
Thank you, Commissioners. David Cox, Periwinkle Lane, Summer Place. To try to answer Commissioner O'Brien's question, the 34-foot center console boat, we also add 2 feet for motors. So that gets that to 38 feet so 36 foot for the boat, for the vessel with the motor, and then 1 foot overhang on the front and the rear.
Well, you got 34-foot center console, so even if you give 2 feet for the motors, you're at 36.
Right.
But then you'd be at 38.
Then we're at 38. And we were looking at the number of pilings that were going to be required, and we're going to end up with a larger, if we built 2 separate structures, 2 roofs, we're going to end up with greater coverage than by integrating them. And so that's how we ended up with, after consulting with DEP and the Army Corps, we ended up with 40 feet. And so I hope, does that answer your question?
It kind of sounds like math by subtraction or something. I would think 2 right-sized lists or covers would be less than 1 oversized one, but whatever. DEP approved it.
Any other questions for Dr. Cox while he's up? There being none, any other comments, Dr. Cox?
Nope.
Thank you.
Thanks for your consideration.
Anybody else from the public wish to speak on this item? There be none, we will close the public hearing. Commissioners?
Move staff recommendation.
There's a motion from Commissioner Zork, second from Commissioner Adams. For discussion, I mean, for me, I always thought that coverage over the lagoon was limited because of the health of the lagoon. And the only reason I've heard today to change the present ruling is that it's not consistent with state requirements, so we should not do it. It may be just because of different issues that have come before us with the state, like biosolids, that I'm not too desirous of just doing something because the state no longer requires it. So I'll be voting against the request. So any other comments? We have the motion from Commissioner Zork, seconded by Commissioner Adams. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. The motion passes 3-2. Commissioner O'Brien and Solari voting against. We move on to public notice items. Mr. Reingold, if you could read those for us, please.
Absolutely, thank you very much. We have a notice of public hearing for July 9th, 2019. This will be the Glendale Baptist Church, Inc.'s request for a conceptual site plan and special exception use approval for the Glendale Baptist Church and School. This will be quasi-judicial in nature. Also on July 9th, 2019, will be a public hearing scheduled to consider amending Chapter 105, purchasing of the Code of Indian River County. This will be a legislative agenda item. And again, those are both public hearings scheduled for July 9th, 2019. And with that, I turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan.
Chairman, we do have the sheriff and Judge Cox here. Would you consider moving up the county attorney's matters to hear that now, and then we can let them get back to their jobs?
You know, the problem with that is that I so enjoy their company and their presence here that I'm afraid that if we let them, you know, they just immediately leave. But in order to keep you happy, Commissioner, that'll be fine. So we'll just skip up, if there are no other objections, we'll skip up to county attorney matters, pretrial services update. Mr. Reingold.
Thank you very much. On May 14th, the Board of County Commissioners authorized the County Attorney's Office to work with the Sheriff's Office and St. Lucie County Pretrial Program to gather a more definitive cost estimate for providing pretrial services here in Indian River County. Since then, I've received a proposal from St. Lucie County to operate the program for just under $200,000 per year. Please note that the cost is based upon the Indian River counties providing a vehicle for use by the program. Based upon a total of 4,500 bed days diverted per year, it is estimated that the program would save Indian River County $400,000, and thus the $400,000 savings minus the $200,000 cost for the program would lead to a estimated $200,000 savings per year. In addition to the savings, the program has other significant benefits. For instance, it would allow certain defendants who could not make bail or afford bail the opportunity to continue to be out of jail and working, making a living, paying for their families, as opposed to being locked up in jail and thus putting their family at risk and their job at risk. So I will note that the sheriff's position on this program is unclear, and I am not sure how the program would be successful without the buy-in from the sheriff's office. The sheriff is here, so he can certainly state his position, but basically, County Attorney's Office thinks that this is an excellent program and a worthwhile program. The only concern I've got is who would be responsible for monitoring the program, who would be responsible for implementing the program and being the contact with St. Lucie County, because I don't believe that that's really the proper function for the County Attorney's Office for it to be successful. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair and the board for any questions.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions of Mr. Reingold? There be none. I'll ask if anybody in the audience cares to comment on this.
Cynthia Cox, Circuit Judge, Indian River County Courthouse. I think you all know my position. This is a program that is prevalent around the state of Florida. There are a few counties that don't have a pretrial program. In our circuit, the St. Lucie, Martin, and Okeechobee have a pretrial program. As you've heard, I'm sure ad nauseum, this is a program that allows judges to have an additional tool to ensure that the public is protected. When someone is, everyone except for life capital offenses are eligible for bond. This is an additional tool that we can ensure that if we set a bond and we need additional conditions such as GPS or drug testing or reporting, that we have that additional tool to keep our communities safe. So I know that the cost savings is a huge issue, and I'm not really sure if it would save the county, and I'll admit that it may not save the county $400,000. Probably not, because the sheriff, I know the jail is very expensive to run. However, if it costs the county $200,000, I think the program is worthwhile, regardless of the savings, because it's needed for our community. You know the types of crimes, you know crime has increased. I could give you many examples. We use the program in mental health court all the time. Rather than incarcerate someone, we'll contract with St. Lucie County, and the sheriff will pay the GPS to put on many of our mental health court people that aren't complying to make sure they comply, rather than put them in jail where they decompensate and they cost the sheriff a lot of money because of their medications. So if you have any issues with it, I did read briefly the report that Mr. Reingold prepared, and I would like I would like the chance, if you are not going to support this program, to get more information from all of the other pretrials around the state, if you need that information. I have some other statistics and studies that have been performed that I haven't shared because I didn't think it was an issue. If you have any other issues, then I would recommend that you send it back to the Public Safety Council and let them get whatever information you need if you think that cost savings is the #1 issue, which I don't agree with. But I'm here if you have any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Judge Cox?
No.
Thank you.
I've got two.
Yes, sir.
One is, when Mr. Reingold spoke, he said that the sheriff's position is unclear.
Right.
And that's been my understanding. So is the sheriff clearly supportive of this program?
I don't know. He was at one time, and then when I came in this morning, he says it's not going to pass, and that's all I know.
Well, one time when we spoke, you said he wasn't supportive, so I'm confused on that. So we'll have to ask the sheriff directly.
Yeah, I
that's
heard
one.
that this morning.
The second one is, based on your understanding, who is responsible for monitoring this and implementing this program? Is it going to be the county attorney or the sheriff?
Well, that was not decided, and I think that's the sheriff's issue, but you can ask him that yourself. In St. Lucie and I believe Okeechobee, it is monitor. Maybe someone else should answer this question, because I'm not clear on that either. I may not be the right person.
Okay.
Yes.
I just bring that up because this board in the past has basically said that the sheriff's a constitutional officer elected by the people of Indian River County, and we tend not to try to get into his business. We've held to that at different times, most particularly during the last impasse that the sheriff had, where we basically said it's not our decision because that deals with the operation of his agency. So to me, that's one of the key questions. And on the savings, I still believe that based on everything else that's been presented to us, there's some problem if it doesn't at least pay for itself.
Right.
But, okay.
I think it would. Let me just respond to it being the sheriff's program. It's a tool for the court, just like problem-solving courts are. It helps us do our jobs and helps us make decisions when we're setting bonds. Yes, they do bond out when they're in jail, so they'll be released, but it's also a court function. So I think that we have a responsibility in the judiciary to let you know the importance of this program despite the sheriff's support.
I'm happy for you to let us know about the program.
Okay.
And I'm just saying that I couldn't possibly support it if it was going to be foisted on the county attorney as opposed to the person who's in charge of that agency. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you. So at this point, I'll ask the sheriff if he'll come up, because I think we have at least a couple questions for him.
Good morning, Commissioners, Mr. Brown, Mr. Reingold. As we mentioned a couple months ago, we're not totally against it. It's the administration end of it. We've talked about some of the Martin County statistics. We haven't seen any of those. As I was sharing with Mr. Brown earlier, the Florida legislature now we have till the end of the year, every sheriff that operates a jail has to collect a bunch of data and support it because we're trying to find out the average cost of an inmate per day. So just the tentative dollars that I see putting in it versus getting out of it, I don't know that economically it's going to work for Indian River County. We're a unique county where most of our inmates are able to bond out, unlike some other counties that really and truly use pretrial release just because of the volume of inmates as well as the dollars in the community.
And is the administration of it, who's responsible for the monitoring and implementation based on your understanding?
That would be Mr. Reingold.
Okay, Mr. Reingold.
His office, which he would sub it to our friend Roy Hudson, who's here with us today. So it'd be a subcontractor.
But of the county attorney, not of the sheriff's
Correct.
agency. Okay, thank you. That's the only questions I have. Any other questions for the sheriff?
Would that be included in the 198, or would that be an additional cost?
That I don't know.
The 198 was actually the proposal from Mr. Hudson, which outlined the various services that St. Lucie County would provide.
So does that include administrating it?
Yeah, it would include their employees, basically as it outlines, they would have one senior pretrial officer and one case manager that they would be providing, along with other items within their proposal. But yes, they would basically providing the two people who would be working here in Indian River County as part of the pretrial program.
And then just, your duty would just be to oversee the reports that come in and...
That is correct. I mean, they would be interfacing with basically the courthouse and the jail would be the primary issue.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the sheriff?
I have one. Sheriff, do you know of the other counties in the 19th Circuit, how many of them are maybe subcontracted to Mr. Hudson? Does St. Lucie County do that? What does Okeechobee do? What does Martin do?
I'll let Mr.
yeah.
speak on that, but I believe it's St. Lucie and Okeechobee, and Martin is standalone.
So St. Lucie County, Roy actually works for St. Lucie County. Okay. And then basically Okeechobee and Martin County sub out Roy's group that works for St. Lucie County.
So it would be a similar program.
That's what they're offering.
Okay.
Commissioner Adams.
I have a question. I'm confused by why you're not supportive of this program. Is it the money or the actual administration?
The administration. You know, I'll support it if the county attorney's office is going to administer it. Now, remember...
Well, why are you against the administration? Because it just makes sense to me that that's where it would lie.
Because it's going to cost, I think, more. I think we're going to lose money on it, to be quite frank.
So then it's the money,
Yes, ma'am.
not the administration.
Well, remember, we still have a role. The sheriff's office doesn't matter who administers it, because we're going to have somebody there to assist, for example, Mr. Hudson's people that would presumably be at our first appearance. Furthermore, when there's a violation of that, much like if there's a violation, stipulation of a bond, we're engaged with those defendants as well.
But if you're not supportive of the program and it's housed somewhere else, but your people have to interface with that program, how can it be an effective program?
Ineffective or effective?
Effective.
That I don't know. We would be involved in one way, for sure.
Begrudgingly or happily?
I think, my suggestion...
I'm really not trying to be, I just am curious.
My suggestion is, number one, we've heard of these numbers that got us all excited a couple months ago and how much money we're going to save. Secondly, this conversation is less than 6 months old, to be quite frank with you, with our involvement. The third is we are undergoing a statewide audit, if you will, of how much it costs, and we've got to report to Tallahassee on what it costs to house an inmate. So we've got to keep all those factors in mind. You know, I'm for it. I just don't want to dive into it and the county lose money.
So my follow-up, maybe this is a comment, not so much a question, but I know most states, most counties in the state have a pretrial program and have had one for a long time. Counties much less well-funded or less savvy, I guess, than us, and counties much more so. I don't think it should be such a problem to implement in Indian River County. I'm confident that we have the ability to do so. I don't agree with your summation that most of your inmates are able to bond out. While some of them are, I feel like a lot of them are not. We have a huge ALICE population in this community, and being arrested or having some type of issue like that is the difference between them getting into real financial constraints and not. A program like this would allow those nonviolent offenders to go back to work. They're being monitored. They're not in the jail, thus adding to the crowding issue that I think that you've spoke about here and in the paper. To me, it's a no-brainer. I don't really understand the pushback from the sheriff's department. I would think this would be something that you would be embracing just as a sheriff in the state of Florida. It seems like that, but I must be missing something somewhere, so.
It's not, I'm not embracing it. I'm not embracing the administration of it, having this added on to our responsibilities. We're going to support it if the county administrator's office is going to administer it. Or oversee a similar program as Mr. Hudson's. And maybe he can add light to this.
Mr. Chairman.
Anything else? Thank
For now, yes.
Commissioner.
I share the same concern, Sheriff, and with all respect, per the design of this great state and this county, constitutionally, the county commission is responsible to operate a safe jail, and we bestow that great privilege to you because, and we fund it because you have the assets. You have the personnel, you have the equipment, and the training, the skills, and the abilities. I don't know if I would want to see this group run the jail, okay? But with that in mind, you have that great occasion, and you do budget for the jail appropriately, which the jail is not overcrowded. I get it. And you have a whole pod that's just empty. It's a storage facility, correct, at this time?
Not exactly storage, but it's one section of it.
There's a couple of boxes in there. It's, you know. Well, with that in mind, that pod, within short order, could be full. Do you agree with that? I do. And this program has such great benefit, and every other county has this tool at the judge's disposal. Why are we dancing?
I think we're just discussing the administration of it.
I understand that, but we can't, the same way as I point out that this commission, where jails are run by the commission, right, and privatized, they're not exactly stellar to the level of your expectation and the delivery to the good people of Indian River County. So with that in mind, looking at the sheriff operating this program, I know that it will be operated at the highest degree of integrity. And when we're looking at, well, is it a loss? Is it you know, you've stated you don't want to see the county lose money. If individuals can return to work and pay their fair share, if they are making money, I think that we benefit. Yes, we benefit, the good people of Indian River County, the commission as well. But more importantly is the recidivism rate, because of the great success of what our judges are doing. I think that we need to consider this a little greater than we have. I know reading in the newspaper about the sheriff support it, not support it, and hearing around and about in different circles on whether there is full support or partial support. And you know, I serve on that committee as well. And you know, I heard when it first came about, it was slam dunk from Chief Justice straight across the board. As a matter of fact, I think presiding was Selby Strickland, right, and he fully supported this as well. I was very impressed and encouraged that the sheriff will take an active hand in this, because after all, you do have all the tools. We don't have the vehicles at dispose and the enforcement capacity. Yeah, we can hire a great guy that other counties are, but And maybe some hybrid could be done, but I think this needs to be administered through your office. And I hope that didn't sound like micromanaging, because you are our high sheriff, but I wish that you would embrace this.
Any other questions for the sheriff? Sheriff, I thank you very much. Appreciate it. Anybody else from the public wish to speak on this item? Anybody else from the public? If nobody else wants to speak?
If I can actually just say one thing, and I didn't mention this in my report, actually, and Mr. Hudson's coming down. I just want to thank Mr. Hudson. He has spent a lot of time coming to our county to talk with the Public Safety Coordinating Council, to meet with me, to meet with Jason Brown, Kristen Daniels from Budget, the sheriff. He has spent time in our courthouse examining it. Roy has spent a lot of time coming up here, so I just wanted to publicly thank you for all the time that you've spent on this issue in the last couple months.
I just,
Name and address to the record, please.
Roy Hudson, I am the Criminal Justice Coordinator for St. Lucie County. Just wanted to kind of clarify a couple things, because sometimes I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding. We provide a program that we, at this point, have contracted with Okeechobee and Martin County also. I've sent the figures forward for what our program has done in Martin County in the first half a year of our existence with them. That's been sent to the group here. Our contract basically with everybody that we contract with at this point goes through the BOCC. They are the payment source. That's who we get it from. We operate the program. Our supervisors run it and all that, but we have to have a conduit working relationship with the courthouse and with the jail staff. So we're very heavily involved with the court security folks and the people of the jail. That's the two main hookups. So we can't do the program effectively without those kind of connections. But certainly, as far as day-to-day administration, we would, if we contracted with you, we would be running the program, and we would be reporting our results in the reporting mechanisms that we use daily. The OPAGA reports, all those type of things, monthly stats and all that would be going to the county, to whomever we're told to send that report to. And what has worked in other counties is basically the sheriff has appointed one of his people as our source of contact, our point of contact there, and our folks work through that point of contact. So I just want to clear that up, and just ask y'all if you had any questions. I'd be glad to answer them for you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hudson?
What's in your experience, particularly in St. Lucie County, because you've got the most time in it, what is the failure rate? I mean, how many of the people that get out on pretrial end up getting rearrested because they violate the GPS thing, or they don't come to their court date?
Can't probably give you an accurate figure on the failure rate, but I'm sure it is probably 20%. That would be a relatively decent guess, I think, dealing with the court system, that people will come in and people that aren't supposed to use narcotics will use narcotics, or aren't supposed to use alcohol, or we have them set up an exclusionary zone where they can't go back to a certain address because that's where the problem has been, and they violate that exclusionary zone. If that happens, then we write up a violation order, we send it to the judge issues an arrest warrant for them, and we pick them up and bring them back in.
And then if somebody got out on bail and didn't show for their court date, what would that process be?
Somebody didn't show up for court, the judge is going to issue a failure to appear order, and they will be, the warrant will go through the process through the clerk and then head to the sheriff, and the sheriff will have somebody arrest them.
My understanding is usually the bail bondsman would be the one tracking them down and bringing them in.
Well, as they do that sometimes, but as someone who spent 45 years in law enforcement and putting those folks in jail, I can tell you that as a sheriff's deputy, I've served many a warrant for failure to appear.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Commissioner Zork?
Yes.
So under the mechanisms, you said the other counties, the BOCC is basically the payment source, and the courts and the sheriff coordinate regardless if the BOCC or somebody else is the payment source. They're still, the judge uses that as a tool, and the sheriff, if somebody gets a an arrest warrant signed because they violated something. And I guess a couple of the parts so I'm not for reinventing the wheel. If the other BOCCs have contracted with you and it seems to be working well in the other 3 counties in the 19th Circuit, I'm fine with trying it that way, and seeing how much time Dylan or Jason has to put into it. Do you have any idea of how much active participation they have to play?
Mr. Reingold has spoken with our county. In our county, our money comes from the BOCC. The program falls under, I work directly for the county attorney, but that's only in our thing. When we contract, it doesn't work that way in other counties. And it's only because 3 of the commissioners, when the program started a decade ago, came to our county attorney and said, we would like you to run the program, and he said, yes, I'll do that.
Okay.
And that's how it kind of wound up in the county attorney's office there. But with our contract programs, it's all basically funded by BOCC. Again, we take care of the day-to-day operations, but we have a good working relationship with the folks with the sheriff's office, with both court security and at the jail, and also a really good working relationship with the judges, because as Judge Cox will tell you, a lot of times they're on the bench, something comes up and they want to release somebody either with bond and pretrial or with just pretrial. They just let somebody know, the bailiff know. Next thing you know, we have somebody running down the hall to go ahead and take care of it for them. So we do develop a really excellent working relationship with the judiciary.
Any other questions for the board for Mr. Hudson? Mr. Brown?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, just putting my 2 cents in here, if you'll indulge me, it sounds like a good program to me. It sounds like it makes sense. To me, it just seems like something that should be a part of the law enforcement corrections function. Notwithstanding that, it's a tool of the court, so it's a court system, but I know that, the voters passed a constitutional amendment back in 1998 to have the state fund court system, so we wouldn't be getting asked to pay for it, I'm certain, if it was part of the court system, so that must rule that one out. I just want to say, and speaking for Dylan, but also should there be any thoughts on it coming over my way, I don't know how the attorney's office or the county administrator's office, for that matter, has expertise in this. So we've got upcoming on the agenda an item dealing with the Republic Services contract. We have experts at running a landfill that are overseeing that contract and managing that contract. So Mr. Howard is a former sheriff's deputy, so he's got that expertise that they're fortunate to have in St. Lucie County. But I'm concerned about somebody in the county organization trying to manage a contract that we don't really know much about. Should something go wrong or the performance isn't happening, I just don't know that we're well equipped to manage that contract. So to me, it seems like without support of the sheriff's office and active involvement from the sheriff's office, I'm concerned about the program being successful. I can see that it can be a successful program, and I can see the merits of that. I just don't know that that's the best setup to ensure a successful program.
And thank you, Mr. Hudson.
Thank you.
Anybody else from the public wish to speak on this?
I just want to respond to 2 things. I think we need to look at how Okeechobee, I don't think the sheriff there is responsible for overseeing the program. And I would urge you, before you totally vote this down, that we look at all the details of how the other counties do it, because I know sheriff's offices or sheriff's programs around the state don't run these programs. They're run by counties somehow in conjunction with the court system. I'd be willing to do more research if that's a concern. About the new arrest and revocation of bonds, there's not a day that goes by that I don't revoke someone's bond, and we don't have pretrial programs. If they have a new arrest or they violate any laws, I revoke their bond and they go right back to the jail. And lastly, give the program a chance. Even after 1 year, if it doesn't save money or it doesn't break even, the $198,000 is a risk that you can take to see if it will work, and we won't come back. If it's not working and it's not beneficial to the community or the courts, we won't come back next year. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public wish to speak on this? There being none?
From the public.
Yeah. Mr. Rangel.
So I want to clarify some issues. So I've pulled up the interlocal agreement for provision of pretrial services between Martin County and St. Lucie County. It basically says under the status of the parties that the parties agree that St. Lucie County is an independent contractor and not an agent of Martin County for the purposes of the agreement. The staff providing the program services are under the control of St. Lucie. The point of contact for Martin shall be the sheriff of Martin County. The point of contact for St. Lucie is St. Lucie County Criminal Justice Coordinator. So clearly there's contemplated in this agreement that the sheriff's office in Martin County becomes the point of contact under that agreement. And then one other point, I know the notices go under the agreement go to both the county attorney and to the Martin County Sheriff. And then finally, I know the proposal originally actually was done by Roy Hudson, who's provided me a proposal, and I thank him for that. The proposal actually went there to the sheriff in Martin County as part of the request by Martin County for them to operate the program. Again, there seems to be this tight interplay between the sheriff and the program. If it's the board direction, I'd be happy to run it. It seems to me that the history appears to be a very close connection between the sheriff's office in Martin County and the actual operation and organization running it, which is St. Lucie County. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the board.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Dylan.
Yes.
Under Martin County, it's run by the BOCC, but the point of contact is the sheriff. And that would be the same here where BOCC manages it, the sheriff would still be point of contact. And it's not point of contact to run the program, it's point of contact, hey, you gotta go get this guy, he violated his pretrial agreement.
I understand it's the point of contact for running the program is basically, if there's an issue with the program, it's gonna be a conversation between Mr. Hudson and the sheriff's person. If we wanna run it differently here, and have that be Roy and me, I defer to the board on that. I guess that's the issue. And so the question really is, are we going to have an interlocal agreement that reads in a very similar fashion, which is the point of contact for Indian River County will be the sheriff of Indian River County. The sheriff's here, he can answer whether he wants to be that person or not under the program, and whether he just, now I will note that there is a quarterly charge under the bill, under that interlocal agreement, but I would defer to the sheriff as to whether he would like to be inserted into that status of the parties and certainly be the person who's receiving notices along with the county attorney in running this program.
I'd like to know that answer if the sheriff would care to answer.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Commissioner, if I understand that correctly, then Mr. Rangel's office would be the administrator. I would be the point of contact to assist with Mr. Hudson's group, meaning that somebody from the sheriff's office, right?
Or I think you said sheriff, right?
So the agreement says the status of the parties, basically the point of contact for Martin shall be the sheriff of Martin County. And then for purposes of the agreement, all the notices need to be provided to both the Martin County attorney and also the Martin County sheriff. Now, in terms of administering the program, whatever issues that happen between Roy and your folks are something y'all would have to sort through. They wouldn't be coming to me as, that's how I kind of view this.
Okay. So basically, the money's passing from your office to Mr. Hudson's office.
Yeah, there's a quarterly bill in here
We're talking about two different things. I mean, you're talking about how the day-to-day operations is going. The sheriff's looking at the $200,000 and doesn't want it in his budget. That's the crux of it. And that's what we all have to understand. So, who you talk to day-to-day is not the issue here. Thank you. Thank you, Sheriff. Anybody else from the public? There being none?
Mr. Chairman, I think where the sheriff is on this is that this is being proposed as this big $200,000 cost savings. And I think his concern is, well, if that $200,000 doesn't appear, they're gonna look at me and blame me for this. And then a year from now, we'll be telling them, hey, Sheriff, you should have made 200 grand, so we're gonna cut your budget by 200 grand. I think that's the sheriff's concern, is that this is being promoted as a savings based on $90 a day, per jail inmate. And I think the sheriff is realizing that that really isn't the right number, because I still have to fund the jail, I still have fixed costs, and so I don't think the sheriff believes that there's gonna be this 200,000 saving, and he doesn't wanna be on the hook if it doesn't appear. And that's, I think that's where the administration issue is that then we could say, well, you know, Dylan didn't run it properly, or, you know, or something like that. But I think that's where the sheriff is.
No, I think
We're saying that you're gonna get the savings, and if it doesn't appear, he's gonna be held accountable for it.
forget even the savings. I mean, he doesn't want the $200,000 coming in his budget. I mean, if we wanted to be entrepreneurial about it, we could say, listen, this 200,000 comes out of your budget. If you get any savings, you keep it. I mean, that'd be totally different. But, and that'd be one way that I could probably go forward with it, but that has to be a contract between the sheriff and Mr. Hudson. You know, because again, for me, the biggest thing in here is that we're now talking about an issue, pretrial services, which is somehow between the courts, of which I know nothing, and the sheriff's office, of which I want to know less, except for the fact that it's operating well. I don't want to have any contact with either one of the two entities. So you're asking, just like Jason said about, you know, at least we in solid waste have staff that knows what they're doing. We've spent years thinking about it. I even understand solid waste in my own home, at least. You know, the jail and the courts are two things I want to keep away from. So I don't want to have to make a decision that is about something about which I know nothing, and especially when for years I've been saying the sheriff's department is the sheriff's, and I've been consistent with that, and to interject myself now would just be wrong. So, you know, I'm not about to support something with that where the sheriff himself is not fully supportive. For me, from the very start, if the sheriff wanted this, the sheriff should have brought this to us. And I object to the way it came before us, and I certainly cannot possibly support something that the sheriff is not fully behind. And so, anyway, I think I'm pretty clear on this one. I'll ask if anybody else cares to comment. Commissioners?
Yes.
Or
I think when you look at the cost of running the jail, the last 10 inmates that fill up a cell are your cheapest cost inmates to house, because you're paying for those beds whether you're using them or not. Your most expensive beds are the 10 people that cause you to open a new cell that you have to fully fund the same staff for 10 people as you do for 50 people, or some much greater number. So when you come up with the savings per day, to me, if we put 200,000 in the program and it keeps us from having to spend money to open another cell because we went over, to me, not having to spend the money because we now have a higher population is the same type of savings. I don't see the sheriff's budget going, us cutting it back from this. I don't see that at all. But I think we just got to figure out how do we get this to where if we do it as a one-year test, where the sheriff runs it and still contracts, and we get some type of 2 or 3 updates a year from the sheriff on how it's going and how time-consuming it is for him, maybe he'd go for that, but not for a lifetime committal.
Yeah, you have no understanding of how this works. First, if you set up a bureaucracy, the bureaucracy is there forever. That's it. When we had the mental health court, which we put money into, we were promised financial information about how it worked, and we never got it. We will never get the information here. So, you know, and what we do know, though, is that the sheriff said economically it may not work for Indian River County. I'm glad you understand the economics of the jail better than I do, but I'm not going to argue with the sheriff on that one. So, and the sheriff is not forthcoming with financial information. In my first year here, we had quarterly financial information from the sheriff, but we asked too many questions, and he stopped giving it to us. So the idea that we're suddenly going to get good financial information if we set up this new program, I think is absolutely a fairy tale. So again, if we don't trust the sheriff to run his organization, then we need to set up a whole new way of dealing in the...
Well, I think we'll hear from the sheriff when he's sued by somebody that says we have to open up that other cell to address overcrowding. Then he's going to be standing at that podium saying, I need $800,000 or whatever that number is to operate that cell. And that's what I'm trying to keep from happening. I know all those other issues, I know those have been going on for a while, but this is it's a preventative investment.
Anybody else? Any questions? Jason?
I want to jump back. So, I want to alleviate the sheriff's concerns that we're going to look for some kind of cut out of this. But, you know, what I see, to Commissioner O'Brien's point, is, you know, they're fixed costs, so you're not going to see that. Where you'll see the cost savings is not having to open Echo Building, right? But to me, having the finances is what drives accountability, because it's in the sheriff's interest to not open Echo Building, but it's in the sheriff's control to run a program that does that. And if the sheriff believes in that, then that's, you run a program, and he's here saying, I've got to open Echo Building, and this is even after we've done pretrial and we've got these 200 people that aren't in the jail that otherwise would be. But you lose accountability. So this isn't about, you know, me looking for a cut and we're going to save $1 million or something like that. But I think there needs to be accountability, because it's a corrections law enforcement function that basically puts it all in the hands of the sheriff, as it should be, as the constitutionally elected officer. But I think the funding drives the accountability and managing the, so we don't want to be interfering with the operation. We also don't want to be involved in whether we're opening Echo Building. But I don't know how we do that with the county attorney's office running the program. So that's it.
Thank you. No other comments? Anybody care to?
Well, yeah, I have comments. Again, I just think in this day and age, this is a program we should be offering to people in the community. I would hope that it would be something that would be embraced by the sheriff. I understand the concerns about the budget. I would like to have this offered to residents. I'm not looking to penalize the sheriff if for some reason the savings don't add out on the first year. I think over the long term, this is something we should be offering to our residents. It's just, in 2019, something that you should be doing. I mean, this isn't 1942. But beyond that, I just don't want this to be the last conversation about this. So if Judge Cox has some more information she could provide, and we need to give her additional time to do that so we can have a better conversation and other options, I'm happy to do that. Again, I don't understand the pushback from everybody involved in putting together what should be a very simple, no-brainer type of service to our residents. That's all I have to say.
Mr. Chairman. And I agree, Commissioner Adams. But Sheriff, could we have a word, sir? This program has been well touted and proven by all of the participants, and you yourself have said it's a benefit, but you don't know if it's a financial benefit. No, we don't serve purely on finances, except for the budget hearings, then it is. And that's coming up soon, Sheriff. You have a fear that and again, I heard Chairman Solari state, once you start a bureaucracy will prevail and stay, and I don't necessarily agree. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I believe that sometimes
plenty of examples.
Some things, yes, but some things are initiated, they're found not to be as fruitful as they were, and they are defunded. I was wondering if the sheriff was willing to look at a trial, pre-trial, and perhaps do a limited time only engagement on this. And I mean that sincerely. I think, yes, there is a fear that once you're engaged, and you know it's going to appear on your dollars, and we're going to have to hold accountable next year too, and the year after, and well, somebody else will be there. I get it, but right now you are our sheriff, and I just think that all the tools are in place, and I think the biggest obstacle is that $200,000 appearing on your budget, which, again, just a couple of weeks from now, we'll be discussing it.
Oh, remember,
Is there any room for a trial?
remember we talk about the money, and I think the council was excited a couple months ago. We heard some very large numbers, and I think for the record, I debated those numbers back then. Now, if we're talking $200,000, you're really talking $400,000 to save $200,000, because you gotta meet that 198 before you start actually saving dollars. The second thing is, there's also, you have to think about the clerk of the court's office. There has to be a room there that has to be constructed, put in place. The pretrial folks will be presumably either at the jail or at the courthouse 7 days a week for first appearance, at which point the judge, he or she, will look at the figures and the history of the defendant or the arrestee and decide if he or she should in fact go to diverted to pretrial. That's how that works. In concert with that, somebody, Mr. Hudson's team presumably, will be physically in one of those two positions, either in the courthouse or here. Unlike other jurisdictions, our first appearance isn't held in the courthouse, it's held at the jail. So then someone will be coming over there to do that. So I think that, you know, there's a lot of work that has to be done even before we could even kick this off, just logistic work. And I know that Mr. Reingold and others have taken a tour, in addition to the, you know, to the personnel.
Sheriff, may I
What
ask-
could we do to make it happen?
I'm sorry?
What could we do to make it happen, Sheriff? When you say a lot of work has to be done, as far as logistically about how the mechanics are gonna occur, what could we do to make this happen? If we put this on the shelf and give Your Honor more opportunity to do some of her research and our attorney to do some additional research, what could we do and what would you suggest? Because I think you do believe in this.
Yeah, I do think that, as mentioned before, I think this conversation started 6 months ago, and we're in a hurry to accelerate it. And we don't have numbers realistic. In fact, I mentioned earlier.
Sheriff, may I ask you, if you had another, how long would you need? Another 6 months or another year to figure out if you really believe this program worked for Indian River County?
If it was implemented,
No, to see if you really wanted to implement this program.
I think at least 3 months, yeah.
Okay, so,
Let's take 6 months,
okay, how about if we gave you 6 months and tabled it
whole
and,
half a year.
but again, then that would give the sheriff time to figure out if he really thought that this was the right program for his jail.
And that will conclude with the average daily cost that is due to Tallahassee at the end of the year, and some distinct records hopefully from Martin County.
But what we need to do is, because we'd heard about the $198,000 cost, but didn't hear about all the other costs on the sheriff's side. So that'll give the sheriff some idea to figure out what those costs are, because that's what the real cost of the program is.
Correct.
And again, I was going forward with the idea that it was $198,000. So it'd be good to know exactly what we were paying before we got involved in this.
Well,
So-
it'll also take us through the budget process, which should alleviate the sheriff's concerns about this coming out.
Yeah, he'll be
Yes,
able to.
absolutely.
Win-win.
So.
Thank you.
So we want to table this for 6 months?
So is that a motion?
That's a motion,
I'd be
sir.
happy to second it. Any other questions or
Do we have to
comments?
do that for a time certain, Counselor, or it could be tabled for 6 months and revisited at the direction?
Yeah, I've heard loud and clear. I will continue to work with the sheriff, with Judge Cox, with Roy over the next 6 months to gather additional information, work closer with getting more information out of Martin County and Okeechobee County, as those counties are now coming on board to this program, so we can learn more from what they're doing right now. And I'd be happy to bring something back in December for the board to talk about.
Great, so that's a motion by Commissioner Fleischer, seconded by Commissioner Solari to table this for 6 months. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Sheriff, Judge Cox, thank you very much. Mr. Hudson, thank you. Well, Commissioners, it's now just before 12. Do we either take a 10 to 15-minute break or take a lunch break? Commissioner?
I just need a 10-minute, 5
Okay.
minutes.
Yeah.
10 minutes.
Okay, we will now take a 10-minute break. Good afternoon. It's time to reconvene the Board of County Commissioners meeting of Indian River County. We now move on to Human Resources, Medical Plan Adjusted Phase and Rates for Retirees for Premier Silver and Gold Plans. Ms. Boyle, you'd like to educate us on this one.
Suzanne Boyle, Human Resources Director, Indian River County Board of County Commissioners. The agenda item before you is an adjusted phase-in for retiree rates for the two plans that we're going to be offering effective October 1st, 2019. There is no change for the premium associated with the silver plan, but the gold plan rate for retiree premiums will be based on the buy-up difference between the silver to the gold that an employee would pay. In other words, for the single coverage gold plan, the buy-up rate would be $730 a month total, which is an additional $70 from the silver plan. And the family rate would be an additional $142.50, totaling $1,167.50. We brought this proposal before you so that the retiree premiums related to remaining in the gold plan would be more affordable for retirees, and this phase-in approach would accomplish that.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Boyle?
I'm sorry, this is codifying our previous conversation, correct?
It is. It's a second component of it. We did not have this in place for you to take action on at the last meeting, so it is consistent with your prior action at the last board meeting.
With that, I'd be happy to move staff's recommendation.
Second.
We've got a motion from Commissioner Adams, second by Commissioner O'Brien. Anybody from the public wish to speak on this item? There being none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Move on to Office of Management and Budget, Water and Sewer Revenue Refunding Bonds. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Oh, there we go. Good afternoon. Thank you, Commissioners. Kristen Daniels, Budget Director. Today I have for you the Water and Sewer Revenue Refunding Bonds Series 2009, consideration for early payoff. So here we'll start with a brief history of the bonds. The Series 2009 bonds were issued to refinance the Series 1993A and 1993 bonds that had an outstanding principal of $32,695,000 in 2009. These bonds were used to pay for water and sewer capital plant asset costs. The 2009 series was issued in the amount of $26,370,000, with the remaining series 1993 bonds left to mature in the year 2000. So this financing reduced the debt service payments by approximately $125,000 each year and provided a $1.4 million net present value savings back in 2009. So bringing up to today, currently the bonds have a remaining principal balance of $13,520,000 with an annual debt service of approximately $2.9 million. So after our annually scheduled September 1st, 2019 payment is made, the principal amount will then be reduced to $11,315,000. The first call date on these bonds is September 1st of 2019. So here we have a savings analysis. Currently, the bonds carry a 5% interest rate, and the county is earning about 2.1% on their investments annually. So the net savings that the county would realize by paying off the remaining bonds about 5 years early would be $935,105. This equates to a net present value savings of $893,079. So as I mentioned previously, the bonds will have an outstanding principal amount of $11.3 million. The proposed payoff would come from the utilities cash balance, And staff feels that even after the payoff, that the utilities would be left with a relatively strong fund balance reserve. So the $2.9 million reduction in the annual debt service will allow for increased renewal and placement expenses to be addressed. This includes the deferred maintenance items that did accumulate during the downturn. I would like to mention utilities does still have one other debt issuance, which is the Series 2015 Water and Sewer Revenue Refunding Note. This is a bank loan and does carry an interest rate of 1.65%, and therefore staff does not advise the early payoff of this series at this point. So with that, staff recommends that the board authorize staff to begin the process of calling the $11,315,000 in remaining principal of the Series 2009 bonds on or after September 1st, 2019.
Thank you. Any questions from Ms. Daniels? Anybody from the public have any questions? Commissioners?
Move staff recommendation.
Second?
Motion from Commissioner Fleischer, second by Commissioner Zork. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Move on to Public Works. Update on sea turtle nesting. Good morning. Your name and address for the record, please.
Good afternoon, Quentin Bergman, HCP Coordinator for Indian River County. Just going to pull the presentation. I'm here today to provide a sea turtle nesting update for this season, 2019. Sea turtle season starts March 1st and ends on October 31st, and in that time we conduct daily nesting surveys along all 22.4 miles of our Indian River County beaches. The turtles that nest on our beaches are the leatherback, loggerhead, and green sea turtles. The reason for this monitoring and the HCP, which is the Habitat Conservation Plan, started in 2004. And this marks the 15th year of that, the halfway point. So we're expecting a lot of things to come up in the next half of this document. For our leatherback sea turtles, this is our largest sea turtle in the world and is our least common visitor to the Indian River County beaches. Generally, they're going to nest from April to July, and you can see here on this figure that the nesting trend has been pretty variable, but as of June 28th, there are 34 nests in Indian River County, which is just below what we had ending of last year in 2018 at 46. Moving forward with our green turtles are known as the herbivore sea turtle. They eat primarily seagrasses, and they are a fairly common visitor to the Indian River County beaches. We can see from this figure that they have a very cyclical nesting pattern, meaning that they have high years and go right into a low year and right back into a high year. 2018 seemed to be a pretty low year with only 235 nesting turtles. As of right now, in June 28th, there are 487. So as kind of predicted, we're expecting a high year for green turtles. And our record for green turtles was set in 2017 at 2,634 nests. And this time of last year, we are already succeeding that previous record of 2017, which is great news. Our loggerheads, which is our most common sea turtle nest, or most common sea turtles that nest on our Indian River beaches, they generally nest from April to September, and this year we are, for state reporting, we're only marking every 20th nest, and I'll speak more on that in a little bit. As of June 28th, we have 3,580 loggerhead nests in the 22 miles of Indian River County, which is great news. We're on track as to meet our previous years, but I would not suspect that we were going to break that 2016 record of 7,100 nests. Wanted to mention a few things about some turtle-friendly beach behavior. It's important to be mindful of where we're placing umbrellas and where our children are digging holes. Like I said earlier, we're not marking every single nest. We can only mark a certain number for a sample size that we then collect data on to report back to the state. And I always want to remind people too that it's really important that we enjoy wild animals from a safe distance. We don't want to interrupt the animal, what it's doing in its natural habitat as well. For those people that are looking to see a turtle nesting at night, there are a lot of opportunities, and many nonprofits host these events with a small donation. A lot of these will come with an educational presentation and an opportunity to see a turtle nesting in its natural habitat. These began in June and go until July, and the sign-ups start in May. And I believe most of them are already booked for the season, so it's something really important to keep in mind for the next season if you'd like to do that. If people would like to see that, the best way to do that is to go to the FWC website and type in where to view sea turtles, and then you can find a location close to you. As in years past, we will be continuing our public turtle digs around the Sexton Plaza. That's where Beachland Boulevard meets the sea in Vero Beach. And these public turtle digs, we will excavate the nest and do an evaluation of the success of that nest. So these are free to the public, wildly encouraged to attend. They're quite fun and interesting. Kids and youth and adults alike really love them, and there's great feedback from these events. We don't know, we can't plan when these are going to occur because we do these digs 3 days after a nest hatches. So every day when someone walks along the beach and checks on each nest, we know when it's hatched. So we have a 3 days warning before that turtle dig is going to be scheduled. We also will do turtle releases sporadically when one of our nearby partners have a rehabilitated turtle ready to be released back into the water. They'll contact us and we can set up a educational presentation, and we always encourage it to be free to the public, and that way the public can see that our Indian River County turtles that are injured become better and come back to our beaches to be released for our public's viewing. So these opportunities, the best way to learn about them is to follow the Facebook page for the Coastal Division at Indian River County Coastal. This is our Facebook page, and you can learn about the other opportunities in our division as well. Another way for people to help is by reporting dead and injured sea turtles to the FWC hotline. This also works for injured or dead mammals or any sort of wildlife concern. The number is here as well. Another way people can really help sea turtles nesting on our beaches are to please follow the lighting ordinances that are in place, because artificial lights on a nesting beach will have negative impacts. Adults are less likely to lay a nest if the beach is well lit, and hatchlings can become very disoriented on their way to the sea. I want to thank our many dedicated volunteers who make this work possible and are very passionate about the conservation of our sea turtles. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Quentin. Any questions for Quentin?
I have a couple, Jeff. A couple weeks ago, my wife and I were walking the beach south of South Beach Park, and it's a pretty good wide beach there and fairly undeveloped. And I know you're only marking one out of every 20, but it just seemed like there weren't many nests at all on that stretch. Have you seen that, or is there any spots that aren't really responding like they have in the past, or?
As far as comparing this nesting season to years in the past, it's pretty normal. The northern parts of the county receive a lot more nests than our southern parts. So our southern parts will actually receive more of the leatherback nests than our northern parts. So it's kind of reversed. The northern part, you have a lot more green and loggerhead nests, and the southern part, you have more leatherbacks. And as you saw by those numbers, the leatherbacks numbers are generally around the 50 nests per year average.
Okay. And then the other thing we noticed, the nests we did see seemed really high up on the dune. And I know the Farmer's Almanac, or the wives' tale, is that the turtles can predict hurricanes better than anybody. So are you seeing a lot of nests up high in the dune now, or?
So it seemed like in early season when the high tide was higher than what it is now, turtles will generally move that same distance and lay their nests up closer to the dunes. But really, it's always going to be variable, and we're still seeing nests now that are a little bit closer to the water line and still nest up in that dune line as well.
Okay, good. My last question is, we were offshore a few weeks ago and saw what looked like an albino turtle. Is there such a thing, or?
It's quite possible.
This thing was like pale, a really pale white color, and just really stood out as not looking like a normal turtle.
Interesting.
Well, yeah, it didn't stick around that long. I was like, oh, look at that, and boom, it was under the water, so.
One thing I'd like to mention too is that with this being such a high nesting season for our green turtles are known to mate very close to the shore. So if any beachgoers are out there and they see a couple turtles maybe look like they're struggling, that they'll be fine. Quite fine.
They're not struggling?
They're not struggling.
Don't go and try to rescue them.
Please don't.
So don't try to help them.
No, they'll be okay.
Very
That
good.
is
Thank
something
you,
that we're
Brandon.
starting to see.
Mr. Chairman, it appears that with this great numbers of visitation by the turtles, if the turtles had a place to put some currency, we could probably cure the TDC challenge as well for that lifeguard station. But no.
Some people want to tax everything that moves.
That's well, hey. No, we love our turtles, and we do walk the beaches, and we are seeing the same thing that Commissioner O'Brien's pointed out. They are up high, closer to the dune area. I just had one question. What do you attribute, if you can answer this, what do you attribute the Treasure Coast to being like the #1 hotspot for turtles? Why do they migrate in such great numbers here in Indian River County?
Great county government.
Is it, well, it must be the commission.
It's low taxes.
No, actually, is it the sand? Is it years of
Or lifeguard
of
towers.
repetition? Is it the
Zero electric.
the ocean flow? Is there any research on that at all?
There is a lot of research on that topic. I'm not super exposed to that specific. As for why is the Treasure Coast and Indian River County, Brevard County being the hotspot for loggerhead sea turtles. There is kind of a debate going on of where in the world is the highest density nesting beaches, and if we're not it, we're definitely a contender as far as the Indian River County and Brevard County, this area of the United States being a very unique location for that. But there's a lot of biological and abiotic factors that go into that, why the turtles are selecting these beaches. And it goes back in history as well. This area has always been really high, so there's quite a bit that goes into finding that answer.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is also Public Works, change order #1 to County Road 512, resurfacing and shoulder widening. Mr. Spierka, so good to see you this afternoon.
Commissioners, Rich Berga, Indian River County Public Works Director.
No PowerPoint.
Yeah. Back in October of last year, we issued a notice to proceed to Community Asphalt to move forward with the resurfacing of and widening of County Road 512 in the Fellsmere area. During the construction, we uncovered a unknown pipe that was placed back in the 1960s by the Florida Department of Transportation. Our records, we didn't have anything on file with regards to this pipe, which is about 10 feet in the ground. And it's one of the reasons why it didn't show up when we did an exploratory dig for our drill shafts for our signals. As part of that, we also had an issue with the utility companies, specifically AT&T. They're so far behind in relocating their wooden poles onto Florida Power's hardening, the concrete poles, the hardening system that Florida Power has been putting in over the last few years, that they caused a delay in the project. So the contractor has contacted us for this change order. The change order is for us to relocate the storm drain that the county's designed so that we can install the mast arm. And we uncovered that we have the flashing light, the beacon lights. The poles that support those were not long enough for the condition that we have out there, and we needed to extend those poles. Lastly, the contractor is asking for an additional time due to the delays of AT&T, due to the redesign or the design of the stormwater system that needs to be relocated in order to proceed with the mast arms. Staff looked at a lot of areas, a lot of different ways to accommodate this mast arm. Unfortunately, with a high pressure gas line that's in that vicinity and the right of way being narrow, the relocation of the stormwater out into the roadway, as we came across, was going to be the cheapest, most safest method to move forward. The contractor is requesting a change order for $203,406. Funding is available in the resurfacing account for this project. Staff recommends the approval of the change order and authorizing the 242 days of delay time and additional funding in the amount of $203,406 for the project.
Question, if you don't mind.
Please do.
Is it 242 days total or 242 more days?
242 more.
So when would it be done?
Well, we expect them to be done before September, mid-September. Unfortunately, the numbers come out as 242 extra days. There was a lot of delay time. They were supposed to be done in April. We've already lost 60 days in design. So we're looking at, right now, if the board acts favorably on this change order, they will move forward with getting these structures. The structures will take 6 to 8 weeks to get because of just basically the development going on. Structures are that long. Once that gets in, the contractor's ready to go. And we anticipate it'll take 2 weeks to do the work to remove the stormwater pipe. Once that's done, it'll take approximately 7 days to install the mast arm drill shafts. They have to sit for 30 days before we can go ahead and put the mast arms on. So there's a lot of moving parts in this time delay that we had to account for.
Is it going to be done by January 17th of 2020?
Yes, ma'am, it'll be done before January 17th.
Okay.
The change order does reflect a final completion date of December 12th, 2019.
Fantastic. With that, I will move staff's recommendation.
Second.
Just have a question too.
We've got the motion from Commissioner Adams, second by Commissioner Flesher. Commissioner O'Brien.
Yeah, Rich, if nobody knew this storm drain pipe was there, is it really necessary to replace it? I mean, is it functioning? I mean,
Well, we can't put the drill shaft in with the pipe there.
well, I know we need to pull it out, but do we need to put another one in? I mean,
We're putting one in. It takes more drainage from the north and from the east. That was the first thing I looked at, just take it out and not put it back. But we looked at it, we have to send the water that way. We have no choice.
okay.
We tried.
To be honest, I'm surprised that's the only one you found, but we'll just keep moving
That'll
along
be
as
our
if that'll,
secret,
yeah.
Whenever you work in the older sections of town or older areas, I will say that you will always uncover at least one or two items that nobody ever knew was there.
Any other
Well,
questions?
how it got there.
Any other questions for Mr. Spierka? There being none, I'll ask if the public has any questions on this item. There being none, the motion is by Commissioner Adams, second by Commissioner Flesher. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Mr. Spierka, thank you very much. We move to utility services, update regarding amnesty. Mr. Burke, and this is not an action item, this is just an information item. Thank you.
Good afternoon. For the record, Vincent Burke, Director of Utility Services. This is an update to the board with respect to a couple different options with regards to the ERUs, the equivalent residential units associated with water and/or sewer. You may recall back in December of 2018, the board voted to approve language for an amendment to Section 201.08 of our code that allowed for a final 90-day amnesty period that went into effect December 18th after the public hearing and culminated on March 18th, 2019. The caveat being that those folks that had taken advantage of the amnesty prior to this time would not be eligible for this final amnesty. So we included some information on the back of the agenda item where we had a couple account holders that took advantage of the amnesty. In fact, we had 5 accounts tied to 2 customers in which we received payments of just over $250,000, and we were approved to write off $329,000 worth of bad debt associated with the 90-day amnesty period. Also in December of last year, the board voted to allow folks who had reserve account holders that had purchased ERUs in lieu of assessments through a 1984 to 1989 time period, if in fact there had not been infrastructure within a 200 feet of vicinity of the property line to be eligible for turning those in and/or refund. And so we did have some folks that took advantage of that. In fact, we had 5 customers tied to 8 accounts, and we had to issue $130,000 worth of refunds. We also note of the revenues that would not be realized through the service availability charges is just over $218,000 a year hit to our revenues, not collecting the service availability charges. And lastly, there was an allowance for those folks that had voluntarily purchased ERUs to reserve capacity in the system to allow for the 10% turn-in if they brought their account by paying that fee. And so we had three accounts tied to 2 customers, in which case we received just over $466,000 worth of payments, but we had to, in essence, write off close to $1.5 million worth of bad debt tied to the penalties and interest that continued to accrue while we had the service capacity available for those particular sites. That would be an annual revenue hit to us of about $192,000. So we tried to summarize that on a single page attached to the backup to give the board an idea of where we are to date. And last but not least, the final portion of the directive was to reach out to any and all account holders that did not take advantage of those programs that I had just described, because the board did say after 6 months we would then proceed with foreclosure proceedings per Florida statute 153.67. And so to date, we still have less than a handful of accounts that have not brought their account current. I do know that we have a Mr. Gomez here from Miami that took time off from his schedule to address the board. And while this is an informational item, we were told that he does have some concern with his account. And certainly I'm available for any questions that the board may have, but I know that Mr. Gomez had wished to at least address the board with respect to his account. Just a quick history on Mr. Gomez's account. I had Cindy pull the file. I believe I did give some of the information to the board last night, but a quick summary is that this property was purchased back in 2008 with 103 water and 102 sewer ERUs attached to the property. There was a short 3-year time period where the base service availability charges were covered by Cookies and Crackers Corporation, but then all payments ceased in 2011. They did take advantage of the amnesty period in October of 2015, in which time they paid $135,896.16 to the county for the accrued service availability charges associated with those ERUs. However, we did write off or waive over $78,000 in penalties and interest at that time. Since the 2015 amnesty, no further payments have been made on that particular account. And the current balance today stands at $110,058.76 worth of service availability charges for the water and sewer ERUs, with $43,959.44 worth of penalties and interest on the account. So I just want to make sure that the board is aware that there's somebody that would like to speak on behalf of that property. And also I'll leave this last item with the board is that we have other account holders since about 2005 within the Great Recession that have purchased and have held on to those reserve ERUs. In fact, we have 5 accounts totaling about 1,100 ERUs that have continued and still pay their service availability charges and maintain that their account is in good standing with the county. So I just want to make sure the board is aware that we do have folks that have made investment, want to retain that investment, and certainly are keeping that investment. Then I'm available for any questions that the board may have, kind of all over the place, but certainly want to make sure the board is aware of the amnesty program, the relinquishment, the turn-in, the refunds, and the foreclosure if the accounts are not brought current after July 8th of this year.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Burke? Thank you, Mr. Burke. I'll now ask if anybody, this is not an action item, but I'll still ask if there's anybody who wishes to comment on this item. Name and address for the record, please.
Isaac Gomez. Do you want our office address or this property?
Whichever you want to give.
Right, I'll give you the property address. 8910 US Highway 1. It's in reference to obviously what he was discussing, but we wanted to see if there was any possibility to allow us to basically pay off what we owe, the $110,000 according to his records. We had a little bit less, but this property was purchased by my father back 2008. He had a hip replacement surgery almost 5 years ago. He re-injured it. He hasn't been back at work. He turned 80 years old yesterday. We actually run a cookie factory in Miami. That's our primary, all his kids, that's all we do for a living, has been running the cookie factory since my father opened it 40 years ago. He decided to do a little bit of investing into real estate. Being in Miami, we were too young at that time to even tell him what to do with his money or whatever, but decided to invest in land. We've just been seeing the money going, and he keeps putting money back into this, and this is the last time we took the amnesty, that he took the amnesty and he paid off the money that was owed. Shortly after, that's when he had the hip replacement surgery after he came back from a trip. So I'm hoping and begging to see if they would allow us to pay the $110,000, which would bring it back to current, and you have our word that we will continue to pay it on time. Now, why we want to maintain it and not lose there is that option of doing the 10% of the debt, but then you lose the ERUs. Well, in talking to, we're not developers. It's an investment. In talking to all the investors, if we tell them that you're not getting those credits for the ERUs, they completely don't even want to deal with that with the property. It's like, forget about it. It's not worth anything at that point. So my father, in the end, will lose just about everything. So we're basically, it's about a $300,000-$400,000 credit that we would if we pay 10%, which would be, let's say, $14,000. We're losing a $400,000 or $500,000 credit on the property. If you would allow us to pay the 110, we would pay it immediately, as tomorrow, as fast as possible, if they would accept.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Gomez?
So, Dylan, the amnesty period ended March 18th, is that correct? Do we have the legal authority to grant what he's suggesting, to pay the outstanding balance? And basically, we're extending the amnesty period kind of unofficially, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think the best way to do that, we've always done them by ordinance change, and we basically removed the amnesty out of the ordinance. My recommendation would be to go back to, if the board wanted to examine this again, we could do another amnesty program period again in the ordinance code, if that's what the board so chose.
From a policy standpoint, we've had amnesties before, and at one point we had, you could only do amnesty once, you couldn't redo it. We did allow that this last time around, and the amnesty period had passed, so staff would recommend against going back against that, because we've got all of those other folks that have paid, that did pay on time, folks that have been maintaining their accounts. I've got a listing of folks that continue to pay their amounts, some $10,000 a month in base facility charges. They continue to pay, so staff's just concerned about not having an end date on this, that we need to, that we've provided ample opportunity. This was one more amnesty that we provided from December to March that was, we were reluctant to provide that, so staff would discourage extending that, because I think we need to get beyond the amnesty period. We provided a pathway. We did the amnesty, we've got the relinquishment, and then if that doesn't happen, then there's the foreclosure process. So that's what staff would recommend.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I just had a question for Mr. Gomez. Sir, did you receive a notice about the amnesty program?
I'm sure we have received the notice. We've been busy with the actual cookie factory. My father has not been to work whatsoever. He's at home, but it comes to the office. and we are aware of that, the notice now.
And you have a staff, and I'm sure that they have receivables and
No.
payables and all.
Yeah, for the factory.
you
for
get
the
mail.
cookie- For the cookie part, yes.
And, because I know that staff did sent out, and we can hear from the director, I know that the Utilities Department was directed to ensure that everyone was notified, and I trust that they were by mail, email, or otherwise.
This basically was thrown on us, I'm talking to the kids, his kids, basically towards the end of this, and we're trying to resolve it. But was it sent out? I'm sure the letters were sent out and received, but we're trying to, it's gonna put us in a bind, the money part, the amount of the money, but we're able to come up with the which we thought was $90-something thousand, but I was speaking to him, I believe it's 110, and we can come up with 110, no problem, and we can pay the ongoing fees from this point forward without any delays from moving forward.
I just wanted to ensure that you were notified and you were aware that we did make.
I personally was not, so it must have been somebody at the office or whatever, but this was brought on to me and trying to fix the problem.
Any other questions of Mr. Gomez? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Huh?
I said thank you very
Oh,
much.
thank you for
With that, we'll move on to the next item, which is Commissioner Matters. The first Commissioner Matters is mine, and it's dealing with biosolids. I'll ask Mr. Burke if he can come on up. As probably everybody here knows, the FDEP Biosolids TAC recommended rulemaking by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Last week, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection had 3 days of hearings about it. There's a draft rule that's out, and I think that many people have significant issues with the draft rule. I know that Mr. Burke does, and I do after reading it. I'll let Mr. Burke address some of the staff concerns, and then I've got some additional ones of my own. Mr. Burke, please go ahead.
Again, Vincent Burke, Director Utility Services. So I apologize if this is already information that the board knows, but there's some folks in the audience or at home that may not have access to the information. As noted before, based upon the biosolids issue last year, the board was very aggressive in implementing the moratorium. We have now entered into our third 6-month moratorium with the Commissioner's Office. And the TAC folks, the Technical Advisory Committee had met to discuss some of the rule changes. So the DEP went through its rulemaking process. They had 3 public meetings, one in Tallahassee, one in Orlando, and one in West Palm Beach. Staff listened into the Orlando meeting, but then went in person with the county administrator, and myself, and Mr. Charis, the environmental compliance specialist, to at least voice our opinion with respect to the proposed rulemaking. Staff did give a copy to the board with respect to some of the issues associated with the proposed rulemaking, and then last night the county administrator just sent a highlight overview. We do know from the public comment period with the Department of Environmental Protection that any and all comments with respect to the proposed rule, and we're talking about the rule changes to 62-640. This is the Biosolids Florida Administrative Code, 62-640. Should be sent either in writing or through the DEP portal on or before Monday, July 29th of 2019. So we have a little bit of time to be able to refine our comments based on our review. There are substantial holes within the existing rule. I'll just go over those briefly. We believe when we asked the department how long this rulemaking process will take, they had no definitive timeline for us. We believe, staff believes, that it could be anywhere from 12 to 18 months. We were given a brief overview of what the process would take to be able to effectuate this change, and I'll just review that briefly with you. So any all comments will be received by the department by Monday, July 29th, 2019. The department will review those comments. They may elect to do a revised rule than what's out there right now based on those comments that they receive. They also have to go through what they call a statutory environmental regulatory cost, the CERC, which looks at any and all proposed costs associated with this rule change. We've heard verbal grumblings from some of the haulers that it's anywhere from $100 to $200 million. I'm not sure where those numbers are coming from, but certainly there's some costs that some folks may come up. I think that some of the municipalities that, if they cannot land apply, would have to look at other avenues for disposal of this biosolids, and so there could be some costs in municipalities. But we would say, what would be the cost to the environment should there be a cleanup for the nutrients that get into the water column? So when the department was asked that question, they were non-committal in the response, because I had to ask the question of whether or not it's the state, it's the department, it's the local property owner, the permit holder, or the counties that would be responsible for the cleanup, and the department certainly had no answer with respect to that question. So if all that goes through it, there'd be a notice of proposed rule that would come out, and then there's a 21-day window where any and all parties could challenge the version of the rule that's put out there. If that challenge comes from interested parties, that could extend the time period till those situations are resolved. And then the ERC, which is another government body, looks at the final rule in its form before it can actually get the blessing to be able to move forward. So that's why staff has concerns with the way that the existing rules are in place today that we know have issues from a nutrient loading standpoint. As we looked at with one of the ranches in the western part of the county, you in essence have a teacup that's already full, and we're starting to add more tea to that cup. And so when we look at the phosphorus loadings, when we look at the nutrient loadings, staff believes that there's a severe disconnect between the IFAS issues of the tissue and soil samples that are out there and the water quality issues that the department has in its power to be able to implement. And so we are requesting, or we would like to request as part of our submittal package with the rulemaking, that there be required testing, monitoring on all sites that have land application of biosolids, so that you almost have a belt and suspenders with the, what I like to call esoteric numbers that came up with, the way that they can apply nutrients to the soil. But then we have real scientific data, which I believe has been lacking. We've had at FDACs where they've had BMPs. And so if you look at all of the farmers that have an option to do BMPs versus water quality testing, 10 times out of 10 times they're going to do the BMPs, which are great, but certainly don't give us real scientific data. And we knew through this process that when we had limited data, it's through the district's site that we were using, the St. Johns River Waterman District site, that had limited data sets in order to be able to make educated decisions. We would strongly recommend that the department look at requiring water quality monitoring at some of the strategic locations in order to start to have a baseline effect of what's happening. So that, in summary, is where we are to date, and certainly staff is going to be compiling comments and submitting those in writing to the department. I just wanted to just give a brief overview of where we are with respect to the rulemaking and some of the time challenges that are out there today. For any questions that the board may have.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Burke? So on this, I've got another number of comments. Staff is going to send in its comments, but I tend to believe the staff's comments are going to be somewhat weedy, and I'm going to ask when I'm done if the board would authorize the chairman to send out a letter of comments to FDEP also. My comments will be a little bit more, I think, policy and a little bit political. Some of that particular areas that I addressed in the letter are Section 1H of the rule, which Mr. Burke mentioned. It gives polluters 3 more years to basically dump biosolids on land after the rule goes into effect. And I think that's 3 more years of biosolids dumping that the Blue Cypress Lake couldn't take. There's a section 62-640-500, which is the nutrient management plan, which for me is the core of the plan. It is a wordy mess that nobody can understand and is ripe for incredible manipulation. Any rule, if it's going to be effective, needs to be a lot simpler, clearer, and understandable by people who read it. I mean, there's even engineers who have to certify the nutrient management plan are going to be guessing on what it means, and that's not a good rule. 62-640-500, parentheses 1, parentheses I, parentheses 8. There is absolutely no agronomically based reason that once, quote, the amount of nitrogen available to be supplied by biosolids has been determined, to allow this amount to be multiplied by a factor of 1.5. which is basically 50% more nitrogen than the plants need. Interestingly, at the biosolids TAC, during the Class AA was discussed for a very short period, but while it was discussed, a consultant for Class AA people got up and said, well, understand that there's no reason to regulate Class AA because farmers wouldn't over-apply it because they're paying for it. Well, if the idea that farmers weren't over-applying it was true, then why would you need to increase the factor by 50%? You wouldn't. And the basic reason is, we all know that these aren't farmers who are applying this. This is a commercial operation to get rid of biosolids. No farmer growing real crops is going to put down 6 inches or a foot of biosolids at any time in the near future, ask his farm workers to go walking through the fields. I mean, so this fantasy, or actually basic corrupt practice that they're allowing, is not farming. Also monitoring, I just want to reinforce what Mr. Burke has said about it. If they're going to put down this stuff, it needs to be monitored. The biosolids TAC, they kept on saying, well, there's not enough science. There's not enough science to say if this is actually doing any damage. Well, okay, what you need is the monitoring. So if you're telling us, even though the literature seems very clear on this, on all the main points, but if you're telling us that, we don't have enough science behind it, then make sure the science is provided. And also, for our comments, I'd like to put in that the people who pollute should be responsible for the remediation of the pollution. Again, that's more political. I don't expect anybody to go with it, but I think that idea needs to be out. And I'd like to ask them the question that, in reality, this is point source pollution, so why isn't it being treated under the point source pollution rules? We couldn't possibly do anything like this with our waste, which we clean up very, very well. I mean, we've at the West Wastewater Treatment Facility had our permit with something like 696 pounds of phosphorus reduced to 179 pounds, and for no good reason. But even though this is the same type of stuff that's coming out of South Florida wastewater management plans, for some reason, just because they're treating it a little bit different, they can put 293,000 pounds within a couple miles of phosphorus, a couple miles from the Blue Cypress Lake. So I really think that we have to address this on a number of areas. I will say that I talked with a member of the board of the South Florida Water Management District right after the rules came out, and she's going to be actively engaged in fighting this and submitting comments. I believe that it might be worthwhile talking to our representative from the St. Johns River Water Management District and ask his board to be a little more aggressive than their staff is. I appreciate the motion to intervene by the St. Johns River Water Management District staff, but their board, which has more political oomph, may be able to do something. And we'll be talking with St. Johns River Keepers to see what they're doing and try to coordinate efforts. So that said, if the board's okay with the letter going out, I will compose over the next two weeks that letter.
Mr. Chairman, I'd send some comments to staff as well, and I'll forward those on to you, see if you want to include them. But two of the things that you kind of touched on, there's a lot of talk in there about this phosphorus soil capacity index, and you're correct. If it's a positive number, then they're allowing them to dump additional phosphorus on there. Right. And according to what I read on this index, if you're at 0 to or negative, then there's a high probability the phosphorus will leach into the groundwater. And so in their current rules, at 0 to 20, not only can you still add phosphorus, but there is a factor to multiply that. And that to me seems insane. And the other real thing is, if it's at 0 or less than 0, which again indicates a high level of a possibility of leaching, that they can still apply the phosphorus, they just can't add extra phosphorus. And I think that is just insane. If we're at a point where we know it's going to leach in the groundwater, we shouldn't be applying it, at all. So I'll send those comments to you. The other thing is in the nutrient management plan, they have factors based upon the number of hay cuttings, and they allow up to 4 cuttings per year. which gives them the opportunity to dump more each time there's a cutting. Going back to the inspections of the Presley Ranch, there's no verification they actually cut any hay, but they just say, oh yeah, we base this on 4 cuttings, so therefore we can apply 400 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So I think there has to be something to monitor. Okay, if you're going to base that on cuttings, then there should be some verification. Do they show sales of hay? You know, how many bale, verify they actually did cut something. So, but I'll send those comments on to you as well.
That's problem is systematic throughout the nutrient management plan. I mean, when you have things that says the NMP shall identify the current and planned plant production. It shall identify. There's nothing behind that. But that runs through each one of these. Any other comments by any board members? So I'm going to take it, if I don't hear anything, that there's a consensus for that.
You can include a couple paragraphs about democracy and liberty and freedom, like your letters normally do.
It'll be
Well,
Jeffersonian.
yeah. On this one, I'll probably just, keep on saying that this is not, ought not to be a Floridians' right to pollute rule, that, maybe, but
if you can get in a sentence about the death train as well, that'd be really good. Just saying.
I'm working on something else which you're going to enjoy then, but it's going to be a little different subject. It's going to take a few weeks. It'll come. So,
I heard they have enough room on those trains that they could fill them up with biosolids because they don't have any passengers.
so we could ship them to Orlando. That's good. I think we need to do that.
Now we're on to something.
I mean, they're already experts in bullshit at Brightline.
Oh,
We would need to stop, and we don't want to stop, so.
Well, with that,
Place to load.
I'm going to accept that there's a consensus and move on to Commissioner Fletcher's item, proposal to name the exposition center at the Indian River Fairgrounds. Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. And again, I'll revert back to when we started this meeting today. We gave accolades to our parks and recreation, and specifically pointed out Kevin Kerwin and the team. They're doing a remarkable job. And I will say over the years, one David Fleetwood did a remarkable job, and he took his commitment and call to duty well beyond expectation. During his retirement, which was just a few months ago, I did point out some occasions where he really exemplified his dedication to our parks and our recreation endeavors. And I don't think that such a man in that endeavor would have the dedication level that he possessed. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. There wasn't a day that went by that he wasn't going home. He had to pass by one of the facilities to make sure that it was up to par, up to snuff, and up to expectation, and safe for the community. And with that, in his passing, I want to know if it was a great tribute to dedicate the pavilion, not the pavilion, but the exposition hall at the Indian River Fairgrounds, something that he held in high regard. If we were to dedicate that to his dedication to our parks and service and fairgrounds, and name it the Fleetwood Center. And, well, I'd just like to make that a motion.
I'll be happy to second it. There's a motion by Commissioner Fletcher, seconded by myself. Any comments or questions? Anybody from the audience? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Move on to Commissioner O'Brien. This next one is one of the highlights of the meeting. I thank you for bringing this up. Elevation certificates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of weeks ago, I started getting some phone calls from architects and engineers and stuff that some of their permits were being held up because there was an appropriate signature on a elevation certificate. And I was sent, and if you look at your first page of the backup, there is the actual elevation certificate. If you look in section D there, it's filled out properly. It's got the license number of the certifier's name, his business address, and then where it says signature, it's signed. Where it says date, it's dated, and the little box that says place seal here, the seal is placed there. So you would think that this would be a perfectly legitimate elevation certificate. Unfortunately, we have to reject that because if you look on the second page of the backup and the yellow highlighting there, FEMA is requiring that the signature and date be included in the small little square where the seal goes as well. And then your third page of the backup is confirmation from staff that they've been to various FEMA workshops, and they've also checked with our FEMA consultant, and they have all been consistently saying no, that FEMA wants the signature and date and license number in that small little square box where the seal goes. So I just bring this one for y'all's attention in case you get calls on it. And two, just I've talked to staff, and they're going to try to make sure they get the word out as applications come in, that they have to sign it, not only where it says sign and date, but also scribbled in that little square where the seal goes. To me, I think this is FEMA deliberately trying to do something where people screw up so they can reject it. It seems totally unnecessary. It seems that if you put all that information in that little square where the seal goes, you won't be able to read the seal. And I have, sent this back to the folks that contacted me, and they gave the same BS comment that you mentioned just a minute ago.
Probably spelt it out.
Yeah, they were as strong as you were on it. But anyway, so I just want to get the word out to that architects, surveyors, engineers, and whoever else might be submitting these, that it's not us doing this, it is what we've heard from FEMA. And staff has also said now, instead of just random checks, FEMA is now requiring us to send them every certificate we get in, and apparently they're auditing every single one. So, again, I agree, it just seems crazy we have to do it, but I think staff is correct with guidance they've been given that they have to double sign them. So that's just for the board's information, in case you get calls on it.
Thank you very much for bringing that up. I think that a lot of people will unknowingly appreciate that you did bring it up, and staff certainly would appreciate it if you could get that out to as many people as possible. Move on to Vero Beach Centennial Parade.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we received an invitation from the City of Vero Beach to participate in their Centennial Parade, which will be Saturday, October 26th. I just bring this up to the board if we want to go ahead and move forward with a float. Staff has said they could probably make available a truck and a flatbed trailer through Public Works. And my idea would be very minimal decorations. I don't think we need to make this a huge, cost or expense. Maybe some buntings and, the red, white, and blue bunting on it, and maybe a couple banners so the Indian River County Board of County Commissioners celebrates the centennial, something modest like that, but to participate in the parade.
And actually, since seeing this on the agenda, I've given it a lot of time and thought to this. I think it's, directed towards the right department, Public Works. So you imagine that flatbed truck, and then a 1/4 inch of asphalt all the way down. And then the banners simply say your transportation dollars at work. I think that would be good. It ties to an essential service. And given that, I take it, yours was in the form of a motion, I'd be happy to second it.
But let me give you my one caveat here. I would be glad to take the lead on this up to a point, but I will be out of town on that particular day. So
me
someone
too.
else
So I
will
won't be
have
on it
to
either, so.
be on it. But
I'll be happy to volunteer to decorate the float with some zip strips and bunting and wave graciously.
How about that asphalt?
I think you should
You
have
are
a
a
grader
shining
that's
light.
being used in Fellsmere.
Well,
Really
in
shining
Fellsmere,
light.
we use hay bales, but if you want asphalt, we can.
Got some hay bales.
Yes, they're in the drain pipe and on 512.
yes, Mr. Chairman, that
Maybe
is
they'll
a
be freed
motion
up by
that we
then.
do participate in the Vero Beach Centennial Parade.
Second, and
I already seconded it, sorry.
I'll be happy to join whatever effort, yeah.
If I'm here,
I don't have any hay bales, but I can figure out some other things.
Any
I
comments?
think the big long.
No biosolids.
The 53-footer. So we have proper sunshine separation between us, so we can't be in the same
That's
picture.
sort of a replica of
Well,
a
I think
lifeguard tower.
you
on
could
the
manage
front.
this to be a big government issue on this one, but there it is.
The truck's gonna be parked on that day anyway, right? So
Come in
it's-
under 200,000 on the budget, I'm
It's a trailer.
I think so, I think so. Well, you know, we might want to requisition the front end loader for the fact.
I'm about to withdraw my
to pick up
motion.
all the crap.
I'm kidding.
Mr. Spierka.
Commissioners, I'll even volunteer to drive the truck.
Okay, there you go. Do
Big guns now. Woo!
you have a CDL license, sir?
So there's a motion by Commissioner O'Brien, second by Commissioner Solari. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Move on to Commissioner Zork's items, proposing Bethel Creek as a pilot project.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. This would be for the commission to authorize the chairman to do a letter of support to suggest and recommend that Bethel Creek be given consideration as the grant application now, as the grant moves forward. Just a little bit of short history. About 6 weeks ago, I was at an event where Representative Altman was at, and he said, hey, you see my money, the appropriations he has in the budget. And I said, well, I thought that was for Brevard only. He says, no, I'll get you some information. So when you look at page 2 of 7 in the backup, item 9C, he says, no, it says Brevard/Indian River. So that was very helpful to know. So this is something I've been passionate about for a number of years, but it's always come down to the money. How do you get the first portion of a study funded? This money that's going to go to FIT, my understanding is DEP and St. John's will write part of the scope. If you recall, back in 2016-17, when St. John's did a ranking for a pilot study that was done a few years ago, Bethel Creek came in number 4. So we've been on the radar before, but I'd like to see us, hopefully be in the 1 or 2 spot on this one. Even if Bethel Creek is not selected, I would like to make sure that what little flow we have in this midpoint of the lagoon is given consideration. I've been told by one person that when you look at the hydrology, if at the north end they start flooding billions and billions of gallons on the north end that's going to go south to come out at Sebastian Inlet, that could hypothetically also reduce what little flow we have in some areas that would travel from the midpoint north up to the Sebastian Inlet. So we need to be watching to make sure something that works good for them doesn't cause us additional problems down here. FIT obviously has some preferred places. They're based in Brevard, and I think they're looking in the Banana River area. But I would like to have the chairman write a letter that would be sent to DEP, FIT, our local elected reps, as well as Representative Altman, just showing our support for the research project and the funding, and to include Bethel Creek as a site of consideration.
And I take it that was a motion?
Yes, sir.
I don't, to be honest, just having dealt with culverts and flow and things like that, I don't think you're going to find that the juice is worth the squeeze. But I'll be glad to second your motion just if FIT wants to look at it. But I think the result is going to be that without putting in some type of massive pump system there where you can talk about moving tens of millions of gallons an hour or something greater, it's not going to do much other than for the folks that live along that section of Bethel Creek, it'll increase their property value. But I think for the overall lagoon, it won't have much impact. And if you're just talking about like putting a culvert there or something, that'll be just a constant maintenance issue, particularly on the ocean side, because it'll fill up with sand, it'll foul. You'll have to put manatee and sea turtle excluder devices on it and all that, and it will just become a maintenance nightmare. But Commissioner Tork, I realize that you've been working on this, so I'll be glad to second it. Just if FIT wants to take a look at it, I just don't have a lot of faith it's going to pan out.
And I think in this first part, this would be more of the hydrology study. If you put a connection point at different points in the lagoon, it would be able to give you the cause and effect of putting in a mechanical connection or a free flow connection. That was one idea that was posed up at the port, but then was shelved because of the location of some of the cruise ship expansion areas up there.
Okay, and on this one, I'm not going to be able to support the motion for a couple of reasons. One, I believe that juice isn't worth the squeeze, but worse than that, for any structures to actually do good would basically cause a political firestorm in the neighborhood where people aren't going to want that type of thing. So we're just inviting something that's going to be contentious. The second thing is, to me, this is just a process of pushing more of the pollution out into the ocean. The oceans are damaged enough as it is. We've got limited resources, and I'd like to see our limited resources actually being used to remove pollutants from the water rather than push them somewhere else. So unfortunately, be unable to support this motion. Any other questions? I'll ask
One other piece of information. This was, the initial study would be modeled after the Destin Harbor project, which those folks were kind enough to come down here a few years ago and talk about the success of their project. And obviously, getting pollution out is better, but this funding is for a flushing study, not for pollution removal. So this is what we have available to us.
Well, that's my point. It's not for pollution removal, so it doesn't do anything. The flushing is going to put the pollution somewhere else. And again, my statement was that I'd rather put limited resources in things which will actually remove pollution. I mean, the ocean is not in any great shape either. So with that, I'll ask if there's anybody in the public who wishes to speak on this item. They're not. The motion was by Commissioner Zork, seconded by Commissioner O'Brien. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 3-2. Commissioner Solari and Flesher voting against. We now move to solid waste
And, Mr.
disposal.
Chairman, I'd like to move
I'll work on
approval
drafting a letter for the chair to sign.
Of items 15B1, 15B2, and 15B3.
Second.
We have that was close on the second. The motion by Commissioner O'Brien, second by Commissioner Flesher. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. And with that, we are adjourned.